Chapter 16. People often said that all things had spirits, but I had never thought that one day I would see these withered skeletons move as if they were sentient beings. They got rid of the black cloth and lined up neatly like soldiers in a military parade. They floated forward in unison. Earlier, when the wooden boxes rolled, there was some noise. But now, the skeletons floated forward without making any noise. Oldie and the others were still discussing something. They didn't notice the skeletons moving closer to them. The fatty and I were restless. Although we didn't know what the floating skeletons meant, we knew it wasn't something good. If the skeletons reached them and Oldie didn't notice it, it would be bad. At this moment, we didn't care about hiding anymore. We directly dashed out from behind the rock. While running, we shouted at Old He and the others. Old He and the others finally heard the commotion. They all turned to look at us. However, before they could see us, they were attracted by the skeletons. What followed after was a series of exclamations. When the group of people saw the strange white bones floating in the air, their reactions weren't any better than the fatty and I. Almost everyone subconsciously took 2 steps back. Even Old He's expression changed drastically. Sprinkle cinnabar. Sprinkle karmic water. Summon the talisman. After a moment of hesitation, Old He shouted and gave orders. I could tell that he was frightened by the scene in front of him. He immediately used a series of skills. Hearing his words, the others quickly calmed down as well. Following Old He's instructions, they took out cinnabar and karmic water one by one and threw them into the group of white bones. Old He and the Taoist priest took out a yellow talisman and held it in their hands. They were ready to take action at any time. Cinnabar had a strong yang energy. It could ward off evil spirits and expel evil spirits. It was effective against ordinary otherworldly items. The so-called karmic water was the water people used to bathe in. People had karmic karma. After bathing, the water would be contaminated with their karmic karma. The water in the bathhouse had been soaked in by countless people, so it had countless karma. If the karmic water was poured on ghosts, it could suppress them. Humans could bear negative karma, but it was very difficult for ghosts, not to mention the negative karma of many people. To ghosts and evil beings, this negative karma was like a huge mountain. Ghosts that were not strong enough would be pressed to the ground and unable to move once they were splashed by the negative karma water. Even with Oldie's experience, this scene of white bones fluttering was something he had never seen before. However, it still couldn't escape from the category of evil ghosts. Once cinnabar and karmic water were splashed on it, it immediately had a miraculous effect. The few skeletons at the front of the row were knocked to the ground in an instant. After struggling for a while, they were pressed to the point where they could not move. The white bones at the back were still drifting forward, but when they reached the spot where the skeleton had fallen, they too fell to the ground before anyone could pour any more cinnabar water on them. Not long after, the originally neat rows of bones all fell to the ground, forming a messy pile. At this moment, the fatty and I had just reached the grave, and we weren't far from the pile of bones. Fatty was very bold. Seeing that there was no danger, he approached the white bones and prepared to take a closer look. Then, he heard Fatty's father shout, "Back off!" The fatty was startled by his father's shout. He didn't dare to take a closer look and hurried to back off. However, after he had taken a few steps back, I saw that the pile of bones that had fallen to the ground had started to move again. The pile of bones seemed to be squeezed by something from all sides, squeezing hard towards the center. Some of the bones were even twisted into a ball, and there were even pung-pung sounds coming from the center, as if the bones were being squeezed and broken. When I saw the fatty go there to take a closer look, I wanted to follow him. However, after seeing this strange scene, I was a little scared. I pulled the fatty and retreated behind Oldie's group. Then, I felt at ease and craned my neck to take a look. I didn't know what the pile of bones was doing, but Oldie didn't want to take risks. He ordered the others to continue to pour cinnabar and karmic water on the pile. However, the cinnabar and karmic water didn't work at this moment. The pile of bones was still rolling and moving faster. It seemed they weren't affected at all. As the rolling speed of the pile of bones increased, suddenly, from the middle of the pile of bones, a skull emerged. This pile of bones was the old principal's remains. Logically speaking, there should be a skull. However, when the bones were arranged in a straight line, I didn't see a skull. I didn't know where it had come from. After the skull emerged, the rolling speed of the pile of bones didn't stop. The skull gradually rose up, and not long after, the shoulder bones on both sides emerged, followed by the arm bones below and the sternum in the middle. As the pile of bones rolled, they formed a human-shaped skeleton, let alone me. Oldie's group had never seen such an incredible scene before. They all opened their eyes wide in disbelief. They didn't know what to do. No one knew what would happen after the skeleton was completely formed. However, they didn't need to think too much to know that it wouldn't be anything good. Since only the upper half of the skeleton was revealed, Oldie didn't want to wait any longer. He chanted, "Dispel evil spirits and scatter souls. Talisman becomes spirit suppressing. Quick!" As he spoke, he thrust the yellow talisman in his hand forward. The yellow talisman turned into a beam of light and flew toward the skull that had just been formed. With a paw sound, the thin yellow talisman fell on the skull and actually made the sound of metal colliding. Then, the skeleton's sternum was smashed and scattered on the ground. The rolling pile of bones gradually slowed down. It looked like it was about to stop. Oldie was worthy of his reputation. His first move was much stronger than the others. I exhaled in relief. When I was about to ask Oldie what was going on with the skeleton, I saw the newly formed hand reach out and touch the skull. The yellow talisman was pushed aside, gently falling to the ground. Then, the pile of bones that had stopped rolling began to move again. The broken sternum was formed again, and its speed was faster than before. Oldie didn't have any more talismans in his hands, but the Taoist priest beside him still had a yellow talisman in his hand. Seeing the situation, he immediately shouted, "The Taishang descends, the three pure ones aid me." After he finished chanting, he didn't throw the talisman at the skeleton. Instead, he stuck it to his chest with a paw sound. As soon as the yellow talisman was stuck on his chest, the old Taoist priest lifted his head. His spirit, chi, and soul seemed to have changed. His hunchback straightened, and he raised the steel sword in his hand. He raised his leg and dashed toward the skeleton. At this moment, the skeleton was forming very fast. When the old Taoist priest arrived in front of it, the upper half of the skeleton was already formed. Only two leg bones were still twitching on the ground, moving toward the skeleton's body. The old Taoist priest swung his sword and hit the skeleton's skull. It created an earth-shaking explosion. I stood far away from him, but my ears buzzed. However, the skeleton's skull seemed to be made of steel. It didn't budge at all. The old Taoist priest's sword attack was useless. Then, the old Taoist priest swung his sword a few more times. The skeleton either used its head or its arms to block the attacks. Its withered bones weren't hurt at all. Not only that, but the bones in the lower half of the skeleton's body also gathered and formed a complete skeleton. It stood there, gazing at us with its empty eye sockets. Inexplicably, I shivered. Oldie's face became more solemn. He shouted at the old Taoist priest, "Brother Huizhen, come back here." The old Taoist priest felt that he couldn't do anything to the skeleton. He reluctantly retreated and stood next to old He. However, he still held his sword in front of his chest. He didn't dare to relax his guard. The skeleton stood there quietly. It was really tall. Looking at it, I couldn't help but think of the old principal in Annie Chen's story. I wondered if the old principal had thought that he would become like this after his death. However, on that rainy morning, the old principal had given up on being a human. He didn't mind falling into the demonic path. Why would he care about his appearance after his death? A group of people and a skeleton faced off against each other. After a few minutes, the skeleton moved again. This time it charged at us. This time it was really fast. It seemed it had gotten used to this body after it had taken shape. Oldie didn't dare to act rashly. He shouted and asked us to scatter. Only he, the two old men next to him, and the middle-aged man who had been driving for us for the past 2 days remained. The skeleton didn't care about us and directly charged at the four of them. Oldie was already prepared. The three old men raised their weapons at the same time and put them together, forming a shape similar to the Qian trigram in the 8 trigrams. The middle-aged man held a very long piece of yellow paper in his hand. It was unknown what it was. It was obvious that old he and the others had prepared many methods to open this grave. However, I didn't know if they had thought that they would have to deal with the skeleton of the old principal that had appeared out of nowhere. As the skeleton was about to reach them, I held my breath. Old he and the others also looked like they were ready to take action. However, right at this moment, the skeleton jumped over old he's head. It didn't even turn its head to look at the coffin that we had forgotten about. Everyone was startled and didn't have time to react. They could only watch as the skeleton rushed to the side of the coffin and reached out to touch the face of the lifelike female corpse in the coffin. I was startled. Did the old principal's skeleton still retain his memory? Did he want to see his daughter? As soon as I thought about that, the next scene almost made me scream. Chapter 17. The old headmaster had been reduced to a pile of bones, but he could still form a skeleton and run back and forth like a human. It wasn't too hard to accept that this lifelike female corpse had opened her eyes. That was why I had calmed down after the initial shock. However, I complained inwardly. It was just the old headmaster skeleton, and old he and the others couldn't even deal with it. Now, we had to deal with this female corpse that I suspected to be the headmaster's daughter. What should we do? Everyone saw the female corpse open her eyes, and they all screamed in surprise. Then, the female corpse got up from the coffin. She didn't pay attention to the people outside. She calmly looked at the skeleton as if she was thinking about something. I took the chance to sneak a peek at the female corpse. Although I could see her through the binoculars from afar, I couldn't see her clearly. Now that I was closer, I could see that the female corpse had a graceful posture. She was wearing a long robe that looked like an ancient palace dress. Her long hair was tied into 2 semicircle buns, and her skin was smooth and smooth. I could even see a faint blush on her cheeks. Her eyes, which had just opened, were full of light. Her skin was as white as jade, and her face was beautiful. If I hadn't seen her climb out of the coffin with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed that such a beautiful woman was actually a corpse. Moreover, looking at her clothes, I was a little skeptical. Oldie had said that Li Ying was buried here, but why was she wearing such a long robe? If she wasn't Li Ying, why did the old headmaster skeleton rush to find her? She had just woken up, so why did she keep staring at the old headmaster skeleton? The female corpse and the skeleton didn't move, and the people around us didn't dare to act rashly. We could only watch. Around 2 minutes later, the female corpse finally moved her eyes away from the skeleton. She lifted her head to look at old he and the other 3. Although she didn't look at the people outside, I felt a chill run down my spine. Goosebumps rose all over my body. Just a moment ago, I had felt pity for her because of her appearance and her pitiful life. But now, I didn't have that feeling anymore. Those cold, emotionless eyes didn't belong to a human. I could even feel a crazy, bloody aura from them, just like the blood baby I had when I first saw it. All of a sudden, the female corpse moved. She didn't attack us, but pointed at the coffin she had just jumped out of. We didn't know what she wanted to do, but the skeleton stood up and jumped into the coffin, lying flat on its back. Then, the female corpse reached out her hand. Somehow, she managed to grab the arm of the middle-aged man who was driving old he. The expressions of the 3 old men beside him changed drastically. They quickly withdrew their swords and slashed at the woman's arm in unison. However, the female corpse was too fast. By the time the 3 of them slashed down with their swords, the female corpse had already retracted her hand. At the same time, the middle-aged man's arm was also taken away. The middle-aged man was next to old he, and he wasn't an ordinary person. However, his arm was suddenly torn from his body. The sharp pain made him scream. His scream was followed by blood gushing from where his arm had been cut off. In just a blink of an eye, it formed a puddle on the ground. It was a terrifying scene. Not to mention him, I was also scared. Even though I had seen many strange things in my life, they weren't as scary as this puddle of blood. It was said that the fear of the unknown was the scariest thing. However, the person who said that had never seen a bloody scene like this. Even after many years, I still thought that the death and injury of our own kind were the scariest things for humans. I couldn't imagine that this delicate and weak female corpse could create such a bloody scene as soon as she made her move. From this, we could see that no matter what it looked like, an evil spirit was an evil spirit. The beautiful female corpse and the sinister blood infant were essentially the same. The middle-aged man's wound was still bleeding profusely, but no one dared to go over to stop the bleeding. Old He and the other two old men did not dare to act blindly without thinking. They raised the long swords in their hands and waited in formation. The only thing they could do was move in front of the middle-aged man and block him from being hurt by the female corpse. The female corpse didn't want to take action. She held the severed arm in her hand and looked at it for a while. Then, she turned around and threw it into the coffin. Shortly after, we heard some cracking noises from inside the coffin. It sounded like someone was eating a bone, which made people shiver. Since I was standing far away, I couldn't see the situation inside the coffin. However, I could imagine that the skeleton was chewing on the middle-aged man's arm. I didn't know if Old He and the others had thought about this situation when they had decided to open the grave today. Anyway, I was scared out of my wits. I clutched the jade bracelet around my neck and quietly called for the red shadow. At this moment, everyone's attention was on the female corpse. No one noticed my voice. I called her a few times, but the red shadow didn't respond. She didn't even show up. At this moment, the noises inside the coffin finally disappeared. However, the female corpse moved again. She blankly looked at Old He's sword formation for a while. She seemed to feel that it was a little troublesome. She didn't attack the middle-aged man, but turned around to face me. Her body flashed, and I couldn't see her movements clearly. In the next second, I heard a horrible scream. A young man standing not far from me disappeared inexplicably. Then, he reappeared next to the female corpse. Just like the severed arm, the female corpse threw him into the coffin. The cracking noises that had stopped for a while arose again. Cold sweat broke out on our foreheads as we realized a problem. It seemed that the dead woman was treating us as food to feed the skeleton. No one could remain calm anymore. A sturdy middle-aged man who was standing not far from me shouted and turned around to run. However, before he could take a few steps, the female corpse moved again. In the blink of an eye, the sturdy middle-aged man was in the female corpse's hand. The petite and delicate female corpse was holding the sturdy middle-aged man as easily as if she was holding a child. It looked extremely terrifying. This time, no one dared to run away. They could only stand there and watch the middle-aged man being thrown into the coffin. Accompanied by a blood-curdling scream, the kacha-kacha sounds became even more rapid, as if the skeleton had also sped up its devouring rhythm. My body started to shake violently. My mouth was trembling, and I couldn't even say the words red shadow. There are many ways to die, but the way I was going to die was the cruelest. No one was afraid of it. In just a blink of an eye, the barren graveyard on the mountainside had become the most terrifying scene in this world. At this moment, Old He finally made his move. He raised the peachwood sword in one hand and maintained the sword array in the shape of the Qian trigram. His other hand slammed hard on his chest as he chanted, "The art of the Grand Supreme receives me. The heart of emerald blood transforms. Where the body is, the Tao exists." After chanting, he spat a mouthful of blood on the sword formation in the shape of the Qian hexagram. After the blood sprayed, the three swords emitted a blood-red light. Then, the three of them chanted at the same time, "Go!" Then, the three swords disappeared into thin air. Only a giant Qian hexagram was left hovering in the air. It fiercely smashed toward the female corpse. It was the biggest trump card that Old He had prepared to open the grave today. After using this hexagram sword that contained the supreme power of the Qian hexagram, the three of them slumped to the ground. They looked exhausted. The female corpse faced the three yang lines of the Qian hexagram, but her face didn't change. She gently lifted her right hand and raised her palm to block the attack. Then, the huge Qian trigram crashed into her palm, leaving three small wounds on her palm. Yes, Oldie had used all of his power to attack her, but he had only left 3 small wounds on her body. The female corpse didn't attack Old He and the others. She just lowered her head and looked at the wounds on her palm. Right at this moment, the cracking noises inside the coffin disappeared. The female corpse lifted her head and glanced at Old He and the others. She seemed to be worried about something. Then, she turned to look at us. Her cold eyes scanned the room and finally stopped on me. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly. I didn't know if my eyes were playing tricks on me, but it was the first time her expression had changed since she had opened her eyes. I didn't have time to think. I had a feeling that I would be taken away by her in the next second. I grabbed the jade bracelet one more time. When I was about to call for the red shadow, the fat man's father, who was standing next to me, suddenly turned around and pushed me and the fat man backward. He shouted, "You guys run!" Then, the fat man's father turned around and faced the female corpse. A dagger suddenly appeared in his hand. I didn't understand what the fat man's father was thinking. If Oldie couldn't deal with the female corpse, what was he going to do with the dagger? Before I could figure it out, the fat man's father moved. He swung the dagger in his hand and stabbed it into his chest. "Dad!" When the fatty, who was standing beside me, saw this scene, his eyes widened as he let out a mournful cry. The fat man's father didn't seem to hear him. He mumbled, "The curse of 9 generations in exchange for a wisp of true dragon energy. Today, I will use the luck of the 8 ancestors and their flesh to exchange for the wrath of the murderous god. The curse of 9 generations, the suffering of 9 generations, the loneliness of 9 generations, the wrath of 9 generations." At first, his voice was low. However, when he said the last few words, it turned into a thunderclap. As if the heavens had sensed his words, the sound of rolling thunder suddenly came from the sky. Then, in the clear daylight, a bolt of lightning tore through the sky. A huge scarlet sarcophagus suddenly appeared above the female corpse and smashed down fiercely. "Run!" In the midst of the chaos, I don't know who shouted, but only then did everyone come to their senses and rushed outside. Only the fatty was still crying and trying to pull his father, but I held him tightly. Just as I was about to drag the fat guy away, the huge sarcophagus that had appeared out of thin air hit the ground where the female corpse was, giving off an earth-shaking rumble. Right after that, the ground shook and countless cracks appeared on the ground. The fat guy and I fell into one of the cracks and slid down into the depths of the dark abyss. At this moment, he suddenly heard a light voice. The voice was as clear and melodious as a lark in the morning, singing a difficult ballad. Gee's cheen she, applied to the middle valley, the luxuriant leaves. Yellow birds fly in the air. Gathering in the bushes, their cries can be heard. Gajee cheen 11, applied to the middle valley. Mo, regardless of whether it is to be mowed or plucked, to be dried or to be dried, there is no limit to it. Tell the Sure family. Tell them to return. Lightly pollute my privacy, lightly wash my clothes. Do you want to hurt me? Return to Ning's parents. Do you want to harm me? Gui Ning's parents. Chapter 18. The chanting was very soft and faint, as if it came from far away in the sky. At this moment, the ground was still shaking. The fatty and I felt as if we were in the middle of an earthquake. How could we have the time to listen to the incomprehensible song? The fatty was still having a mental breakdown. Even though we were in danger of falling into the crack, he didn't care. Left with no choice, I continued to hold him with one hand while my other hand tried to grab something to slow down our falling momentum. I didn't want to fall to our deaths. After grabbing for a long time, I finally grabbed something that looked like a tree root. The fatty and I paused in midair. Unfortunately, the fatty was too heavy. Before we could stabilize our bodies, the tree root was torn off, and we continued to fall. Fortunately, not long after I felt my body slow down. It wasn't as straight as before, but rather, it was as if I was rolling on a slope. After a while, there was a thud in front of us. The fatty seemed to have hit something. Before I could react, I bumped into the fatty too. Finally, we stopped. It was dark around us, and I couldn't see anything. Rocks and dirt kept falling from behind, hitting me. I didn't know where I was, but I knew we were in danger. I panted and gritted my teeth, trying to get up. However, the pain in my body made my limbs weak. After I got up, I wanted to call the fatty. But suddenly, my legs went soft, and I fell to the ground again. This time, I didn't have any strength left. My head was still spinning, and I couldn't move anymore. There was still the sound of rolling rocks and sand, but it was much calmer than before. I could faintly hear the faint chanting from before. However, the content of the chanting was more difficult to understand. I couldn't even understand it. Sometimes it was high-pitched, and sometimes it was low-pitched. When it was high-pitched, it sounded like hundreds of birds singing, making people feel happy. When it was low-pitched, it sounded like an oriole singing at night, making people feel sad. I didn't know how long it had been, but the chanting that lingered in my ears finally quieted down. My vision turned black, and I fainted. When I woke up, I still hadn't opened my eyes when I felt my body aching. I couldn't move even if I wanted to. There was also a burning pain on my left hand. Just now, when we were rolling down, I was holding the fatty with my right hand, and my left hand was grabbing everywhere. It was probably at that time that my left hand was cut by something. At that time, the situation was critical, so he didn't feel any pain. It wasn't until now that the pain was unbearable. Apart from that, the place where my left thigh was in contact with the ground felt cold and slippery. It seemed that the ground there was very wet. I didn't notice it first until something moved against my thigh, crawling on my thigh like a snake or an earthworm. This time, I was scared out of my wits. I didn't know where my strength came from, but I jumped up and kicked my legs. After a long time, I finally got rid of that thing. I was afraid that the thing would crawl onto my body again. I wanted to run, but it was completely dark around me. I didn't know which direction to run in. Moreover, I was with Fatty when I fell. Now, it was completely silent. I didn't know if Fatty was still here. Fatty, Fatty. While preventing the thing from crawling onto my body again, I called Fatty's name. However, after a long time, I didn't get any response. In the end, I had no choice. I squeezed the jade bracelet on my neck and called for Red Shadow a few times. However, she didn't appear. I even felt that the jade bracelet wasn't as cold as it usually was. I had a strange feeling that Red Shadow wasn't inside the bracelet. I stood there and thought for a long time. Eventually, I came up with a solution. I used my feet to feel around and found a few small pebbles. I carefully hooked them to my side and picked them up. Then, I threw them around one by one. While throwing them, I continued to call for Fatty. After throwing a few pebbles around, I confirmed that I was in a relatively open area. There was a slope on the north side, which was where we had fallen. The south side was very wide. I used all my strength to throw the pebbles, but they didn't hit the wall. The pebbles hit the walls on the west and east sides. However, the difference was that the west wall was very close to me, while the east wall was very far away. After 1 or 2 seconds, I heard the pebbles hit the wall. Through this method, I roughly understood that I was in a tunnel that faced the north and south. The west wall was closer to the west wall. From the pitch-black surroundings, I guessed that after we had rolled down, the gap above us had been covered. Otherwise, there would have been no light at all. After confirming the environment, I calmed down a little. I felt my way to the west wall and used my feet to collect some pebbles. Then, I threw them in the direction where I had gotten up. After throwing a few pebbles, I heard a muffled thud. It was obviously different from the sound of the pebbles hitting the ground. I was happy and hurried to call Fatty's name. I called him a few times, but there was no response. So, I continued to throw and call him again. After a long time, I finally heard a muffled groan. I had never thought that the Fatty's voice could be so pleasant to listen to. I was so excited that tears almost flowed out. I hurried to ask him, "Fatty, are you awake?" Before the Fatty could reply, I heard him curse, "F***, what the hell is this?" Then there was a commotion. I guessed that the Fatty was just like me. He had just woken up and found that something wet and slippery was lying on his body. He was scared. After a long time, the Fatty stopped moving. He gasped for breath and asked, "Third baby, is that you? What's going on? Why is it so dark?" Then, the Fatty's voice became softer. I guessed that he remembered what had happened before he fainted. I was afraid that he would be sad, so I hurried to tell him what had happened after I had woken up. I told him what kind of environment we were in. I asked him to be careful and walk to the west. Once he reached the wall, he would meet me. The fatty knew that it wasn't the time to be sad, so he did as I told him. However, he kept his mouth shut and didn't say another word. I didn't think it was a good idea to continue like this. After he walked to my side, I asked him what we should do next. The fatty was silent for a while. Then, he finally said, "It's so dark. The place where we came from must be buried. But since we can still breathe, it means that there's oxygen here. Didn't you say that there's a passage to the south? Let's go there. Maybe we can find the exit." According to the current situation, I didn't need to discuss anything. I knew that the only way was to go south. The reason why I asked the fatty was because I wanted him to talk more and not be too sad. After discussing, the two of us held onto the wall and carefully walked forward. Although it was dark, the road was smooth. The only accident was that my hand accidentally touched a wet and sticky thing on the wall. It felt similar to the thing that was lying on my leg when I woke up. It almost scared me to death. I didn't dare to hold onto the wall during that part of the road, so I could only use my feet to move forward. Fortunately, besides this small incident, I didn't encounter any other accidents. I didn't know how long we had walked, but the road started to twist. The fatty and I took a semicircular route. Because it was pitch black, we couldn't find our direction anymore. We could only follow the road and walk forward in a daze. Because we had walked for too long, the fatty and I had almost lost all hope. But at that moment, a light suddenly appeared in front of us. After being in the dark for so long, the fatty and I didn't care whether the light in front of us was a blessing or a curse. We were a little excited, so we quickened our pace and quickly walked towards the light. What made us even happier was that although the light was very far away, it seemed to be getting closer to us. At first, it was only a dot of light the size of a soybean. But after a while, it felt like a candlelight in front of us. After walking for a few more minutes, we finally saw it clearly. There was a group of people in front of us. They were holding a bright red torch in their hands, and they were walking towards us. Since they could hold a torch, they were definitely human. They weren't the two monsters we had encountered outside. The fatty and I finally relaxed. We raised our hands and shouted in that direction. In this dark and quiet environment, sound could easily travel a long distance. The people on the other side heard the noise and sped up, heading toward us. When we reached them, I saw the old Taoist next to old He. He was holding the torch that was the only source of light. Besides him, there were a few other people. Their ages varied, but they all looked young. They were the people who had dug up the grave with the fatty's father. However, old He, the other old man beside the old Taoist, and the middle-aged man whose arm had been torn off weren't here. That group of people recognized us. The old Taoist asked, "Are you the two kids outside?" After seeing them, the fatty and I didn't feel so scared anymore. We hurried to the old Taoist and told him what had happened after he fell. Then, the fatty asked about his father's situation. Did the old Taoist see his father's body after he fell? Strictly speaking, we were still alive because the fatty's father had sacrificed his life. Although we weren't sure if he could survive, at least we were still alive. The old Taoist sighed and shook his head. I didn't see the fatty's father's body. Then, he briefly explained the situation on their side. After they fell, the old Taoist was lucky enough to fall not far from the group of people. What was even luckier was that a car had fallen with them. The group of people took out the gasoline from the car and poured it on their clothes. Then, they tied a stick together and made a simple torch. After verifying the information on both sides, the old Taoist sighed. I sensed the airflow here and thought the exit was in the direction you came from. Now it seems that we went the wrong way at the fork. Let's turn back. Then, he said, "You two kids follow behind me. Don't stray too far from me." With that, he led us back to the road we had come from. Not long after, we saw the fork in the road the old Taoist had mentioned. As soon as I saw the fork, I understood why the old Taoist and the others had chosen the road we came from. I was afraid it wasn't because they wanted to sense the airflow. At the other fork, the ground wasn't as flat as the road we had come from. There were some short stone pillars erected on the ground. They seemed to be arranged in a messy, unknown pattern. What was even more different was that there were actually a few egg-sized beads embedded in the rock wall around the fork in the road. They emitted a faint light, causing people to feel a chill in their hearts. It was as if this place led to the yellow springs of the Nine Nether. Not to mention that the old Taoist was a very capable person. Even an ordinary person could tell that this cave entrance couldn't be entered easily. Lu Dei, light the torch. We're going to check first. The old Taoist gave his order. Then someone lit a fire with a lighter. A young man walked out with a newly lit torch. The old Taoist had great prestige. After he gave his order, the young man didn't dare to disobey. He braced himself and walked in. It was strange. The young man was holding a torch, and the cave was decorated with pearls. However, as soon as he walked in, he disappeared from our sight. Then, before we could react, we heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the cave. Chapter 19. In the dark tunnel, everyone's hearts were stretched taut. Now that this terrifying scene had appeared, the young people standing at the edge of the tunnel collapsed. They screamed and wanted to run away. The old Taoist priest turned his head and shouted, "Calm your mind." His voice wasn't loud, but when it reached our ears, it sounded like the ringing of a giant bell. It shook our hearts and made us sober up. I was also flustered, but after hearing his words, I calmed down. The young people who wanted to run away also stopped and returned to the crowd. However, they still looked a little frightened. The old Taoist priest gazed at the dark cave for a while. Then, he said to the crowd, "When you follow me from behind, you didn't see any other exits. These two kids came from the front and said that there were no other exits. So, if we want to get out, this is the only path we can take. You've seen the danger, but we don't have any other choice. This time we'll go in together." Then, he lifted his feet and walked toward the cave entrance. When he reached the short stone pillars, he added, "Of course, if you don't want to go in, you can choose another path." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure disappeared from the cave entrance. After the old Taoist priest brought the torch in, the light became much dimmer. The stifling atmosphere became even heavier. The two young people who had been following him didn't think too much and directly followed him in. At first, the crowd was a little hesitant. However, after seeing the others enter, the others also swarmed forward like a swarm of bees. They were afraid that they would be left behind. Everyone had a herd mentality. Even though there was danger in the cave, with the old Taoist and so many people around, they would be able to deal with the danger. If they really stayed outside, it would be even more dangerous. In such a strange underground cave, if they left the crowd, they would probably die. The fatty and I were still kids, so we didn't have any other choice. Moreover, we were standing behind the old Taoist. After the two young people entered, we also followed. Although there were glowing pearls at the entrance, we couldn't see the situation inside from the outside. When we got in, I opened my eyes wide. Since I had fallen into this underground tunnel, I had been walking on a dirt road. The walls were also made of the simplest rocks. It looked like a big rat hole. It wasn't until they reached the entrance of the cave that it became different. However, it was just a few glowing beads. Compared to the outside, the scene in front of me was like comparing the summer palace in the Forbidden City in Beijing to a rat hole in the African wasteland. In a gigantic space, a giant gate stood not far from us. I could vaguely see countless pavilions and terraces in the distance. For a moment, I felt like I was in an illusion. It was as if I had arrived outside an ancient royal garden. Outside the cave, when they saw the glowing pearls, a few of them showed greedy eyes. However, under the great danger, they didn't care about getting rich. But inside the cave, there were countless huge, luminous pearls embedded at the top of the cave, as if there were countless stars on the dome, forcibly forming a Milky Way at the top of the cave. Torches were useless in this place, because the light from the pearls was enough to light up the place like it was daytime. I had grown up in this mountain village, but I had never thought that such a big palace was hidden under this barren graveyard. Everyone who entered the cave was dazzled. They were shocked by the scene in front of them. Only one person was an exception. The old Taoist didn't look at the pavilions, and he didn't look at the huge pearls on the ceiling. He was looking at a coffin in front of the gate. To be more precise, he was looking at a skeleton in front of the coffin. No, it wasn't a skeleton anymore. Its cheeks, neck, and chest were covered in red skin. The other parts of its body were just white bones. This skeleton's body actually grew flesh. I couldn't help but recall the scene where the female corpse had thrown a person into the coffin to feed the skeleton. Did this skeleton grow flesh after eating human flesh? At this moment, Liu Dei, who had just disappeared, was standing by the skeleton's feet. He had a big wound on his neck, and dark blood was flowing in a puddle on the ground. Apparently, the skeleton had killed him. However, the skeleton didn't eat. It just stood in front of the coffin and stared at us with its empty eye sockets. Half of the flesh had grown on its cheeks, which looked extremely evil. When we fell into this underground tunnel, I thought that the stone coffin that the fat man's father had created at the cost of his life had smashed the female corpse and the skeleton to death. But now, it seemed that the stone coffin had only targeted the female corpse, and the skeleton had escaped unscathed. Not only the skeleton, but the coffin behind it also seemed to be the coffin of the female corpse. It was also intact, but I didn't know how it had followed the skeleton to this place. The old Taoist was still holding the steel sword in his hand. He pointed at the skeleton and said resentfully, "Because of what happened to you when you were still alive, we were kind enough to keep your corpse. We want to send your soul to the afterlife, but we made a big mistake. You're just a dead soul, yet you want to keep your corpse and eat flesh to grow flesh. Today, I will grind your bones into ashes and send your soul to the netherworld." The old Taoist seemed to be hot-tempered than old he. As soon as he finished talking, he took out a yellow talisman and waved it in the air, chanting, "The Grand Master comes to me. The three pure ones help me. The Jade Blood Sword is born. Please Mao Shu succeed." Then he stuck the yellow talisman on his chest and spurted a mouthful of blood. Coincidentally, it landed on the steel sword in his hand. The cold light on the steel sword instantly turned into a blood-red light. Then the old Taoist dashed forward and reached the skeleton in just a blink of an eye. He slashed at the skeleton. Just like the previous time, the skeleton stood still and waited for the old Taoist's sword to slash at it. Then it raised its arm to parry. However, it was different this time. The power of the old Taoist's sword was much stronger than before. With one slash, the skeleton's arm was cut off. Squeak! Squeak! The skeleton screeched in pain, and its half-grown face showed a human-like expression of pain. It took 2 steps backward, but it still stood in front of the coffin. The old Taoist didn't give it a chance to breathe. He wielded his sword and slashed again. At the same time, he kicked Liu Dei's corpse back to us. The skeleton couldn't resist the second slash, and its other arm was cut off. The skeleton retreated again, and its back was now leaning against the coffin. As the old Taoist was about to raise his sword to attack again, we heard a rustling sound coming from the coffin. We were startled. Is there something else in the coffin? The old Taoist didn't care about that. As he was about to kill the skeleton, the lid of the coffin exploded. A jade-like hand reached out from the coffin and grabbed the old Taoist sword. Then, a figure in white jumped out of the coffin. It was the female corpse. Her face was still beautiful, but the skin on her entire upper body had turned into a pile of rotten flesh. One of her legs was almost completely broken, leaving only a bit of flesh attached to her crotch. Her originally neat hair was also disheveled, making her look like a ghost from the netherworld. The fat man's father had used his life to unleash that earth-shattering attack. Even though we were standing far away, we felt like we had just experienced an earthquake. However, the female corpse hadn't been killed yet. She was just beaten into a pitiful state. Moreover, the rotten flesh on her body was moving as if it was healing her body. The old Taoist's expression changed drastically. He could only fight against the skeleton if he used all his strength. However, the female corpse was an existence that he and the other two couldn't even handle. Even though the female corpse was heavily injured, she wasn't someone that he could handle alone. The female corpse gently shook her wrist, and the sword in the old Taoist's hand was broken into two halves. The old Taoist was pushed back more than 1 meter and fell to the ground. He looked at the female corpse with a desperate face. However, the female corpse didn't look at him. She turned around and looked at us. I didn't know if the others had the same feeling under her cold gaze, but I felt as if she was staring at me. The old Taoist struggled to sit cross-legged on the ground. Then he closed his eyes. The others also felt desperate. Among the people who had come here today, 2 of them had become the skeleton's food. At this moment, our fates seemed to be sealed. Everyone looked like a prisoner who had been sentenced to death. They stood there with dull eyes. Some of them even slumped to the ground. However, right at this moment, the giant stone gate not far from us squeaked as it opened. Then, the red shadow walked out of the gate. I gawked. The red shadow that hadn't come out no matter how many times I called her, had now walked out of the mysterious stone gate. The female corpse finally moved her eyes away from us. She turned to look at the red shadow. The red shadow's head was still covered by the veil. He lightly walked to the center of the female corpse and the rest of us. Then, she turned to face the female corpse. After keeping silent for a while, the red shadow raised her hand and gently lifted her veil. As the red shadow lifted the veil, I heard a series of cracking sounds. I turned to look and saw that the skeleton that had regrown half of its body seemed to have been crushed by a 1,000-pound boulder. The white bones all over its body broke, and countless bone fragments flew everywhere. When the red shadow lifted her veil, the terrifying skeleton was gone. Only bone fragments were left on the ground. Chapter 20. Everyone dropped their jaws in shock. They couldn't believe what they had just seen. I couldn't believe it. That night, the red shadow that had gently massaged my legs had lifted her veil, and the skeleton that the old Taoist had to use all of his power to deal with had been smashed into smithereens. And that female corpse, the one that the fat man's father couldn't kill even with his life, was now lying on the ground. I couldn't help but remember the black doe string that he had used to seal the grave in the graveyard yesterday. The red shadow quickly lowered her veil. She didn't say anything and just pointed at the coffin. The female corpse crawled up from the ground, but she still kept her head low. She looked very obedient. She used her good leg to hop back into the coffin and lay down. The red shadow reached out to push the coffin lid closed. Then, she turned around and faced us. As we had just walked through the gates of hell, everyone was still scared. Moreover, the red shadow was wearing a red wedding dress. From a certain point of view, she was even scarier than the female corpse and the skeleton. No one dared to relax. All of them looked at her anxiously. Only I exhaled in relief. I even felt a little regretful. When the red shadow lifted her veil, she had her back to me, so I didn't see her face under the veil. It was a little funny. At that moment, I thought that the red shadow's face had scared the female corpse and made her kneel. How ugly would that be? The red shadow stood there in silence. The thick red veil blocked her line of sight, but I could feel that she was looking at me. After a while, she turned around and picked up the coffin from the ground. Then, she walked toward the giant door. The giant stone door opened again, squeaking noises that sounded a little ear-piercing. I felt a little dizzy. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. However, the people standing next to me all fell to the ground and fainted. Even the old Taoist priest's broken sword fell to the ground with a clang, and he fell to the ground. I didn't know what was going on. Then, I heard the red shadow's voice from the giant door. "Follow me." As soon as she said that, the red shadow disappeared behind the giant door. I had a kind of blind trust in Red Shadow. Moreover, she had just saved us, so there was no reason for her to harm us. I didn't care about the person who had fainted on the ground and followed him through the huge door. Just as I stepped through the door, I raised my head and saw 2 enormous beast heads charging at me. I was frightened, but I didn't have time to retreat. I closed my eyes and waited for my death. Then I saw 2 huge statues in front of me. They were 2 strange-looking wild beasts, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws at the door. They looked very real. More importantly, the statues were too big. Each of them was 20 meters long, and they were very close to the door. When the people who just walked and looked up, they couldn't see anything other than their eyes. Although it was just a statue, I was still scared. My face paled. I turned around and saw that the red shadow had placed the coffin on the ground. He was holding a wooden box in his hand. Besides that, there were a few people lying on the ground not far from her feet. I focused and saw that they were old he, the middle-aged man with the one-armed man, and the old man with the ruler in his hand. Among the people who had fallen, only the three of them hadn't met up with the people outside. I didn't know when they had entered the stone door. Red Shadow placed the wooden box on the ground and said to me, "Take them and leave." With that, she turned her back on me and slowly walked towards the statue of the beast. I didn't know why, but I panicked. I asked her, "What about you?" The Red Shadow seemed to be walking slowly, but she was already very far away. Her figure was a little blurry, and only her voice could be heard. "We will meet again if we are fated to. Husband, take care." Husband? I was dumbfounded when I heard the Red Shadow's name. Even after she had completely disappeared, I was still bewildered. Did she just call me husband? Why? I suddenly recalled the scene in my dream when we were married. I felt that it was absurd and unbelievable. The Red Shadow had completely disappeared. I didn't want to think about it anymore. I hurried to wake up old he and the others. However, I had only taken 2 steps when I kicked the wooden box that the Red Shadow had placed on the ground. I suddenly remembered that the Red Shadow had said, "Take them and leave." Did she mean take old he and the others and this wooden box? That should be the case. Otherwise, the Red Shadow wouldn't have purposely placed the wooden box on the ground. The wooden box wasn't big. It was only the size of a book, and it was very thin. There was a push board on the top, so I guess there was something inside. I wasn't in the mood to look at it, so I picked up the wooden box. Since I was worried that Oldie would ask me about the origin of the wooden box after I woke him up, I purposely put the wooden box on the waist of my pants and covered it with my shirt. After everything was done, I walked over and pushed Oldie. He seemed to be unconscious as he lay there. Who would have thought that when I gently touched him, he would jump up and slap my shoulder, making me roll twice on the ground. When I got up, rubbing my shoulder, Oldie was still sitting on the ground in a daze. His eyes weren't focused, and his pupils seemed to have dissipated. He looked just like the idiot who used to wander the streets in our village and giggled all day long. I didn't know what was wrong with old he, so I carefully called his name a few more times. Then I saw that his eyes slowly regained focus, as though his soul had finally returned to him. "Grandpa he, Grandpa he," I called his name twice more. Oldie turned to look at me and said in a weak voice, "Hey, it's you, kid." Before he could finish his sentence, he jumped up from the ground. His left hand made a hand seal, and his eyes squinted. His pupils shrank. He looked just like the cat I had seen in the fat man's house, looking around in fear. I hurried to comfort him. "Grandpa there's no danger around. We're safe now." "Shut up." Oldie cut me off. He stood there with his eyes looking around for 7 to 8 minutes. Then he exhaled and turned to ask me what happened. Of course, I wouldn't tell him about the Red Shadow. I simply told him what had happened outside. Then I said that I had also fainted. When I woke up, I heard some movement inside, so I came in and saw them. Oldie nodded and didn't ask any more questions. He walked over to the middle-aged man and the other old man and kicked them to wake them up. After the middle-aged man and the old man woke up, they looked like they were making threatening gestures. It took them a long time before they calmed down. I don't know what happened before they fainted. After they calmed down, Oldie didn't explain anything to them. He just told them to follow him and then walked to the door. Just then, I noticed that both of the middle-aged man's arms were still intact. It scared me out of my wits. Earlier, by the tomb outside, I had seen the dead woman tear off one of his arms with my own eyes. Blood had spurted out and formed a big puddle on the ground. But now, only his left sleeve had been torn off from his shoulder, and there was a lot of blood around it. His arm was still intact. I pointed at his arm and opened my mouth at old he. I was so surprised that I couldn't say anything. Oldie shook his head at me and said, "Let's talk outside." Then he walked out of the stone door. When the last person walked out of the huge door, the stone door quickly closed without a sound. The people outside were still lying unconscious on the ground. Oldie walked over and woke them up one by one. When they woke up, They were no different from Oldie's group. Their eyes were dull, and it took them a long time to wake up. However, no one moved around like Oldie's group. After waking them up, Oldie didn't ask much. He did a head count and arranged for people to carry Lou Day's body out. The entrance that we had come through didn't look like a cave anymore. It looked like an intact rock wall. On the other hand, there was a deep cave in another direction. Although the cave's appearance was strange, it was the only way. Oldie didn't hesitate and lit a torch, walking in first. Not long after we entered, we heard someone shouting, "There's light." The group lifted their heads and looked forward. Indeed, there was a faint white light in the distance. It looked like the North Star in the night sky, guiding the way. Only then did the desolate crowd finally raise their spirits and hurried on with their journey. After walking for more than 10 minutes, we finally got out of the long tunnel. When the blinding white light shone on us, we felt as if we had been reborn. Some of them even slumped on the ground as soon as they got out of the cave. It was around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Only a few hours had passed since we had come here to open the grave. However, everyone, including me, felt as if a lifetime had passed. After a while, I looked around and realized that we weren't at the hillside where the graveyard was. We were at the foot of the mountain. Oldie saw many people slumping on the ground, but he didn't stop urging us to continue. He arranged for us to rest here for a while. At this moment, someone finally noticed the middle-aged man's arm. He gawked and asked, "He Yuan Shan your arm? How did it grow back?" As soon as he said that, everyone turned to look at the middle-aged man, their eyes wide open. He Yuan Shan didn't say anything, and he didn't look happy or happy. Quite the contrary, his eyes showed the deepest fear. He turned to look at Oldie. Oldie's face didn't look any better than He Yuan Shan's. He shook his head and was about to say something when we heard a rumbling noise from the cave entrance we had just come out from. Not good. I'm afraid the cave is going to collapse. Everyone, leave this place. Oldie's face changed. He hurried to order everyone to leave. After we had all retreated far away, the cave entrance had disappeared. Sand, stones, and trees were rolling down from the mountain. We could even feel the tremors under our feet. There was a small earthquake here. Oldie didn't mention He Yuan Shan's arm anymore. He just silently brought us back to the village and sent me home. Then, he took out a mobile phone and made a call. He asked someone to pick them up and bring them back. Since the fat man's father had passed away, Oldie didn't let the fat man go home alone. He brought him back to the county. After they left, I had dinner at home. Then, I felt dizzy and sleepy, so I went to my room to sleep. I slept from evening to early morning. When I woke up at midnight, I was still groggy, but my hand was still holding the jade bracelet on my chest. Although I knew that Red Shadow had entered the stone door, I still called out to him a few times, as if I had been possessed. Of course, there was no response. When the Red Shadow had left through the stone door, I didn't feel anything. However, when I woke up in the middle of the night, I realized that I would never see the Red Shadow again. I felt so lost. I moved my body and felt a little uncomfortable at my waist. I remembered the wooden box the Red Shadow had given me in the stone door. I hurried to take it out. After I pushed the wooden board open, I saw a stack of square silk cloths inside. At the top of the silk cloths, there were 3 big black characters written in a crooked script. I could barely recognize them. They were the words Death Scripture. I had seen this type of script in a history book. In my memory, it was called Big Seal Script or Small Seal Script. To the left of the 3 big characters, there were a few rows of small, flat characters. Carry me in form, work me in life, lose me in old age, and rest me in death. Those who are kind to me in life are kind to me in death. Chapter 21. I had just experienced all kinds of horrors in the underground palace. Now that I saw the word death written on the cloth, I felt an inexplicable fear. But then, I remembered that the Red Shadow had purposely left this for me. She must have done it for a reason. I endured the discomfort and took the cloth out of the wooden box, spreading it on the bed. I don't know what this cloth is made of, but it's very thin. It looks like a thin stack, and it doesn't even seem to be as thick as my textbook, but after it's spread out, it's very big. There's still 2 layers left, but it's already bigger than the bed I sleep on. If it's completely spread out, I'm afraid it won't be smaller than a room. I sat on the bed and pulled the cloth. I started to read the big words at the top of the scroll. It was written in traditional Chinese characters. Although I had learned classical Chinese since junior high, I couldn't understand it all. After flipping through it, I could only confirm that the content was related to feng shui and metaphysics. I couldn't understand the details. The cloth was divided into 2 sides. On one side, it said Luo Jing Geomancy, Dragon Cave Sandwater. On the other side, it said Witchcraft Metaphysics. These were the categories on the top of the front and back sides. I could recognize these words. At that time, I didn't understand it. I just had a vague feeling that if I learned the content, I would be as capable as old he. This thought was enough to make me very excited at that time. I flipped through the cloth that was like a heavenly book to me and studied it from start to finish for the entire night. Only when the sun rose did I reluctantly fold it again and hide it in the wooden box. It was the red shadow who had given it to me. It was just like the jade bracelet on my neck. I shouldn't show it to others. The result of the whole night's study could be summarized in one sentence. I didn't understand a single word. The next day, after the sun rose, I was worried about the fatty. Although I knew old he had brought him to the county, I couldn't help but want to go to his house to see him. The fatty had lived with his father since he was a kid. Now that he was alone, I didn't know what to do. As his childhood friend, I was very worried about him. After breakfast, I went to his house. I waited for him for a whole day, but he didn't come back. I gave up. Since the high school in the county was far from my house, I had to go back to school on Sunday afternoon after the weekend. Moreover, I had to attend 2 periods of self-study at night. So, I went back to school that afternoon. However, I didn't see the fatty even after the self-study session ended. I was worried, but I didn't know how to contact old he. I couldn't sleep well when I returned to the dormitory. However, after returning to the dormitory, he also received a piece of good news. Guo Mingming, who had been in a coma for a few days, had woken up. His body was fine, and he could come to school in a few days. I thought it was amazing. When we were dealing with the blood baby, Guo of his soul had come out. I thought Guo Mingming's soul had come back in a few days. I remembered that when I left the dormitory that day, Oldie had used a paper doll to collect Guo Mingming's soul. Now that Guo Mingming had recovered, Oldie must have used some method to return his soul to his body. Oldie must have gone to Guo Mingming's house. I asked the classmate who sent me the news, but he shook his head and said he didn't know anything. I only went to Guo Mingming's house in the afternoon. I only know that Guo Mingming's body is fine. I don't know anything else. Oldie had cleaned up the dormitory that day. We had moved in again a few days ago. However, I couldn't fall asleep that night because I was worried about Fatty. I kept thinking about the blood baby and Fatty's father. Then, I touched the jade bracelet on my neck and thought about the red shadow. I didn't know why I felt so down that night. It wasn't until the next day when the fatty came back to school and told me that he was going to transfer to another school that I understood. It was most likely because I had a premonition that we would be parting. The fatty was the same age as me. He was only 16 years old. He was still a child. After his father passed away, he became an orphan. When we met the next day, he told me that he was going to live with old he for a while. That's why he would transfer to another school. He would leave in about a week. Moreover, he wouldn't stay in school that week. He would go with old he to the graveyard on the hillside of our village to look for his father's body. Then, he would deal with the matters in his ancestral home. After a simple farewell, the fatty left. We had agreed that he would inform me when he was leaving and that we would meet again. However, there was no such thing as a mobile phone back then. The mobile phone that old he had used that day was the first mobile communication device I had ever seen. In the end, the fatty and I missed the chance to meet again. When I returned home at the end of the week, the fatty's house was locked. I purposely went to his ancestral home in a mountain, but there was only a pile of ashes left. I couldn't help but recall what the fatty had told me about his father. 9 generations of corner, 9 coffins. After the 9 coffins were filled with people, the ancestral home was sealed and burned. The fate of the 9 generations had come to an end. When I first heard the story, I thought it was a distant story. I didn't expect that in just 10 days, the word from that day would become a prophecy. After the fatty's father passed away, the village didn't have a new coroner. It didn't seem to affect the villagers much. At this time, the country had started to carry out cremation. Although the villagers didn't like it, they didn't dare to find a coroner when they had a funeral. Those who had an ancestral grave would quietly bury their bodies there, while those who didn't have a strong family background would just find a random place to bury their bodies. The funeral culture that had been passed down for thousands of years didn't seem to be important in this era where science and technology were surging. Just like before, I went to class every day. However, my interest in Chinese was much stronger than before. To be precise, I was interested in ancient Chinese. As I continued to study, I could gradually understand what was written on the cloth. It was a complete inheritance of metaphysical knowledge. It could be said to be all-encompassing, and it was abnormally abstruse and profound. In the past, the education I had received since I was a child had made me scoff at these things. However, after experiencing so many things, I now believed that the knowledge passed down by my ancestors wasn't superstition. It was another kind of science. Perhaps the logic of this science wasn't as clear as the Western science system. However, after studying it for a long time, you would find the truth hidden in it. It was just like Chinese medicine and Western medicine. Western medicine could list your cell diseases and the chemical composition of medicines. It could use a set of strict logic to make you believe in its scientific nature. Chinese medicine couldn't do that. It wasn't because it didn't have strict logic, but because many people couldn't understand the basic logic of Chinese medicine. Once you understood the basic theory of Chinese medicine, you would find that its precision wasn't any less than that of Western medicine. Along with the study of ancient Chinese, I understood more and more about the knowledge on the cloth, and I could even use it in my daily life. When I was in the third year of high school, I accidentally saw a student in my class. His glabella was narrow and sunken, and there was a shallow black spot in the center. More importantly, there was a red mark next to the black spot that had been scratched by something. According to what was written on the cloth, the glabella belonged to the Fate Palace, and this kind of face was the fiercest of the 12 Fate Palace faces, the black meets red face. The description of this face on the cloth was, when black meets red, there will be calamity. First, I didn't know much at that time, so I didn't dare to say anything. Second, even if I did, no one would believe me. During those days, I was worried that something would happen to my classmates, so I followed him. In just 2 days, I saw him encounter danger twice. The first time was during PE class. My classmate was playing basketball, and I was watching from the side. Suddenly, I saw a triangle on the ground next to the basketball hoop. I instinctively kicked it away, but before my foot could leave the place, my classmate suddenly fell from the side, and his head hit my leg. At that time, I wasn't sure. But now that I thought about it, if I hadn't kicked the triangle away, his head would have hit the triangle, and his life would have been in danger. The second time was in the afternoon after school. On the way to lunch, the student inexplicably turned to a small pond in the school. He leaned against the railing to watch the fish. After watching for a while, he flipped over and fell into the pond. He didn't even make a sound. Only his 2 legs were above the water. I hurried to call someone to pull him out of the water. After pulling him out, the classmate's entire head was covered in mud. No wonder he couldn't move in the water. After that, I didn't care whether others believed me or not. I directly told the classmate that his physiognomy wasn't right. I told him to be careful for the next 2 days, and it would be best if he could find a knowledgeable person to take a look. My good intentions weren't taken seriously. That classmate's face was covered in mud, and perhaps he felt embarrassed. After listening to my words, he didn't care at all, and even scolded me as a lunatic. That day was Friday, and I went home for 2 days. When I returned to school the next week, I heard the news that the classmate was at home during the weekend. When he was crossing the road, he was run over by a truck, and his entire body was crushed in half. Because of this, I blamed myself for a long time. But at the same time, I completely believed in the death scripture written on the cloth. From then on, I put more effort into studying it. When I graduated from high school and applied for university, I chose to major in ancient Chinese. During the summer vacation, when I was about to go to university, my family's financial situation was better. Since I was admitted to university, my parents decided to build a new house. When building a new house, we also needed to find someone to take a look at the geomancy. The day after we confirmed that we were going to build a house, my father went to find a geomancy master. Chapter 22. With the development of technology and some historical reasons, the inheritance of folk feng shui culture has suffered terrible damage. So many people in the city do not understand these things at all, but in the countryside, many of the ancestral things are still passed down. Take building a new house, for example. When building a new house in the countryside, there are many things to pay attention to. First, you need to invite a feng shui master to look at the land. Then, according to the location of the land, you need to calculate whether it matches the zodiac of the owner of the house. Then, you need to look at the direction of the mountain to see if it is a favorable year. Finally, you need to decide on the day to start the construction. The feng shui master my dad found is a very famous feng shui, immortal Wang family in our town. His name is Wang Zikan. The Wang family was the same as Fatty's family. They had been looking at feng shui for generations, but unlike Fatty's poor family, the Wang family was not poor at all. Instead, they were overflowing with wealth. Bai Shishing from the Fatty's family belonged to the lower class. He only knew about funerals, so it was hard to avoid the 5 drawbacks and 3 defects. The Wang family was a proper feng shui master. As long as they didn't violate any taboos, they naturally wouldn't be disturbed by the 5 drawbacks and 3 defects. Moreover, the Wang family did have real ability. They relied on their ability to make a living and easily made a lot of money. In the past, when Old Man Wang was still alive, I heard that even the county magistrate came to ask for his fortune. He was very famous in the surrounding villages. My father had to put in a lot of effort before he managed to invite the Wang family to help us. At this time, I understood some metaphysical knowledge. When my father told me about this Wang Zikan, I felt that this name was a bit strange. Zhe was water, and Cohen was Yin. The person with this name must have a strong yang fire in his life. He was a stubborn man who was hard to get along with. It was true. Wang Zikan looked like he was in his 40s. He wore a serious face and didn't smile much. When he came to my house, he casually glanced at the plot of land and said that it was a good place to build a house. Then, he wrote down the date of construction on a piece of red paper that my father had prepared. He also confirmed the location of the main gate, the 4 residences, and the kitchen. These 3 elements were the most important in feng shui of a yang residence. As long as there were no major problems with these 3 elements, the geomancy of the house would not be too serious. I looked at the location Wang Zikan had chosen. The gate faced the south, which was the most common location. Of course, there wouldn't be any problem. As for the east and west residences, the position of Master Sun of the Li School was set. According to the death scripture, Master Sun of the Li School, the Fire Wind Ding Shi, the Good Kind family, was originally a feng shui layout that was managed by the adopted son, named Tianyi Auspicious Residence. China was very particular about family bloodline. There was a saying, there are 3 ways to be unfilial, and having no descendants is the worst. Even if one had a fortune, no one would inherit it in the end. It was said to be a lucky house, but in fact, if it was in ancient times, it would be a haunted house. However, times are different now. Speaking of it now, I am the only child in the family, so it isn't too serious of a problem that we don't have many children. Looking at it from a comprehensive point of view, this structure is superior in that men and women are benevolent and righteous, and women run the household. It can be considered a good structure. As for the position of the kitchen, Wang Zikan chose the Qian position. Although the main gate and the east and west residences were important, they weren't as important as the last one, the kitchen. It was said that food is the god of the people. Among the people, there was also the custom of offering sacrifices to the kitchen god. It was said that it had been around since the Qin dynasty. All of these prove the importance of the kitchen in the feng shui of the yang residences. If the feng shui of the other residences wasn't good, it could be remedied. However, once the feng shui of the kitchen was set, it couldn't be easily changed. Even if it was changed, it would have to wait for 3 years before it could take effect. The feng shui of the kitchen had 2 points. The first was the position of the kitchen, which was the Qian position that Wang Zikin had chosen. The second was the position of the kitchen door. This door wasn't for people to walk through. It was for offering sacrifices to the kitchen god. These 2 points had to be put together to see if it was good or bad. According to our custom, the location of the kitchen was set at the beginning, but the position of the kitchen door was set after the house was finished. Then, on an auspicious day, the location of the kitchen door was set. It was called opening the kitchen door. It was a time to hold a banquet and invite relatives and neighbors. After verifying the information I had learned, I felt that there was no problem with the feng shui Mr. Wang had set. My father and I packed a bag of 1,000 renminbi and respectfully sent them to the door. Then, we set a date to come to our house to open the kitchen door. Soon, it was time to build a house. The carpenters in the village came to the homestead and started to break the ground. When it came to breaking the ground, there was a set of procedures that needed to be followed. The first procedure was to level the foundation of the house. When it was time to level the foundation, they had to find a black ox and use it to set up a plow. After that, they had to plow the ground 3 times. Then, they had to manually fill the ground. After the foundation of the house was leveled, they had to put down the foot of the wall. When they did that, they had to put down the stone that was attached to each pillar. That was the first procedure. The second procedure was to erect the horse. Before erecting the horse, all the wood had to be cut on the spot. Then, they had to choose a day to let it go green. To let it go green, they had to choose a tree and invite the carpenters to cook it. Then, they would go to the tree and light 3 joss sticks to offer their food. After the carpenters had finished chanting the auspicious words, they would chop down the 3rd elder first. After that, the others could start. After the wood was cut, they had to bring it to the foundation of the house and erect the horse. Before erecting the horse, the carpenters had to make a new wooden horse. When all the wood was ready, they would use the wooden horse to send the horse. The third procedure was to erect the horse. On the night before the erection of the pillar, the carpenters had to make offerings to Lu Ban. The host family had to fill a bucket with food for the carpenters to put in the Lu Ban memorial tablet. After the memorial tablet was set and the joss sticks were lit, the carpenters went to send the horse. When it was time to send the horse, the carpenters would hold a bottle of clean water and stand at the crossroads facing the east. Then they would spit out a mouthful of clean water and recite the incantation. The first chant is that the eastern diabolical path hides in all directions. The second chant is that the western diabolical path burrows out. Go back to where you came from. Return to where you came from. With Jiang Tai Gong here, all the gods retreat. After reciting the incantation, the bowl was broken and the chicken head was placed on the horn of the wooden horse. Then, the chicken head was chopped off and thrown forward. If the chicken head was facing forward, it meant that the horse had already started. If the chicken head was facing backward, it meant that the horse had not started. The host family had to pick up another chicken and send it again. The fourth procedure was the pillar. In front of the pillar, a piece of green cloth was used to wrap the hammer. The carpenter stepped on the second pillar with his left foot and began to recite the incantation. The former Hong Li Zhen, facing the toilet, not the Xiong Bien, cutting the water to drive the waves, suppressing the earth to guard the gate of heaven, entering the middle palace pillar, the rivers and seas to protect my body. Not a copper hammer, not an iron hammer, but a wooden hammer passed down by Master Lu Ban. After reciting the incantation, the carpenter aimed the hammer at the second pillar on the left and shouted, "Rise!" Then, the rest of the people started to draw the pillar. The last one was to raise the beam. Before raising the beam, one had to lower the beam. When building a house in the countryside, there was an old saying, the father owes the girl a beam, the girl owes the father a sheep. When building a house, most of the beams were sent by the father-in-law's family. After the beam was opened, one had to toast the master with tea and wine. The carpenter drank the wine and then congratulated him. Drink the master's cup of wine. The master's generation will be rich. Drink the master's cup of tea. The master's generation will be rich. Then the master carried a rooster and asked the carpenter to lower the beam. The carpenter held the rooster and recited, "Purple beam, where was it born? Where did it grow? After reciting the incantation, he answered, "Born on the back of an old dragon, grown on the waist of an old dragon. 1,000 people passing by do not dare to touch it. 10,000 people passing by do not dare to cut it." Master Luban snorted, "You will fall into the rock stratum. You will not be able to reach the beach. You will not be able to shine. Master Luban will push you up to the light." After the incantation, he began to raise the beam. First, he pulled the beam to the big window and asked the relatives and friends to hang a red cloth. Then, he lifted it up and pulled it to the top. The carpenter used a ladder to climb up while reciting the incantation. "My feet step on the ladder to heaven. My hands hold the silver ladder. I climb the first river. I climb the second river. My descendants will come out to be high-ranking officials. Number 1 middle school climbs the beam. My descendants will come out to be nobles." After the beam was placed, it wasn't the end. 2 carpenters sat on each side of the beam, one holding a teapot filled with water, the other holding a wicker basket. The wicker basket contained yuan bao, coins, and food. The master and his wife stood in the main hall and used a bedsheet to receive the yuan bao. The carpenter first threw the yuan bao into the master's bedsheet and asked, "Do you want it rich or expensive?" The host replied, "Even if you're rich, I want you." After throwing the yuan bao 3 times, the other carpenter poured water down. The master wanted to shout, "Money comes, water comes, gold, silver, and other valuables come in." Finally, the carpenter with the wicker basket grabbed the food and threw it in all 4 directions, shouting, "Good luck." At this point, the ceremony of building a house came to a successful end. After understanding the customs of building a house, I compared the geomancy of houses recorded in the Death Scripture. I found that some of the ceremonies were related to geomancy, while others weren't. However, all the ceremonies contained a yearning for beauty and blessings to the master's house. I followed the carpenter and watched the ceremony, feeling that it was very interesting. Although the villagers were particular about building houses, the layout was small. The group of carpenters worked for 1 month and built a brand new house. Soon, it was the day Wang Zikin and I had agreed to open the kitchen door. A few days ago, my parents had informed their relatives and neighbors to come and have a drink. Early in the morning, our relatives and neighbors came to our new house to celebrate. My parents had been busy the whole morning, preparing a sumptuous feast. When it was almost noon, Wang Zikin arrived home. He said a few celebratory words out of courtesy. Then, he went to the kitchen and started to calculate the location of the kitchen door with a compass. Opening the kitchen door was different from other geomancy methods. The main gate and the 4 residences all had their own rules. Even if you didn't look for a geomancy master, you could follow the location of other houses. However, the location of the kitchen door had to be determined according to the overall situation of the master's house. Even Wang Zikin had to use his compass. Shortly after, he put away the compass and pointed at the southeast side of the kitchen. That's the best location to open the kitchen door. Of course, the masons who built the house were present during the opening ceremony. They immediately opened a small door at the place Wang Zikin had pointed at. Then, the relatives and neighbors started to congratulate my parents. My parents smiled happily and thanked them one by one. However, I couldn't smile at this moment. Wang Zikin had pointed at the southeast side of the kitchen door. According to the 8 trigrams, it was the Sun position. Wang Zikin had set the Qian position for our kitchen. According to the Death Scripture, the Qian and Sun positions were a battle between metal and wood. It was called the heavenly wind and fire. It was said to harm humans and animals and cause women to go crazy. The conclusion in the scripture was, the charm trigram leads to a bitter death. The officials and concubines give birth to lewd lives. The women go crazy. Chapter 23. Although I could see that there was something wrong with the stove door, I didn't dare to say it out loud. After all, the things recorded in the Death Scripture were dead knowledge. I had never come into contact with such matters before. Wang Zikin, on the other hand, was a famous geomancer. He had seen countless Yang residences. Perhaps there were some principles that I didn't understand. If I said my opinion, it would only make a fool of myself. At this moment, the relatives and neighbors had congratulated us, and the last step was to hang the peace silk before the housewarming ceremony was over. The peace silk, as the name suggested, was to hang a red silk amulet on the lintel of the main house to symbolize the safety of the house. My parents had prepared the peace silk, and they handed it to Wang Zikin. After Wang Zikin read a few happy words, they handed it to the carpenter. At this time, my dad had already placed the new mahogany ladder next to the door. The carpenter happily held up the red silk and climbed up the ladder. He hung the red silk on a nail that was specially nailed on the lintel of the door and chanted, "The family is safe and sound, wealth and good luck." As soon as the peace silk was hung, my parents finally smiled in relief. It wasn't easy to live in the countryside. Building a new house was a lifetime's work. Although I had been admitted to university and might work outside in the future, this new house was actually prepared by my parents for me to use as a wedding house. It was the tradition of the villagers to build a house at the age of 18. After planning for so many days, his parents were naturally overjoyed to see that everything had come to fruition. However, right at this moment, a gust of wind blew in the noisy courtyard. It didn't blow the cherry tree or the new tablecloth on the table, but the peace silk that had just been hung on the lintel. Before the carpenter could get down from the ladder, the peace silk made of red cloth was blown to the ground by the wind. The smiles on my parents' faces froze. The peace silk falling to the ground was a bad omen. The crowd became noisy. The carpenter saw that something was wrong and hurried to pick up the peace silk. He climbed up the ladder and hung it up again, muttering, "Blessing of the wind." This time he didn't dare to let go. He held the silk for a long time, and after confirming that there was nothing wrong, he exhaled and let go. Hoo-hoo! Just as the carpenter loosened his grip on the peace silk, another gust of wind blew over. The peace silk swayed once more before falling to the ground in front of everyone's eyes. Everyone's expression changed. The carpenter's eyes widened in disbelief. My dad's face darkened. My mom was so anxious that she almost cried. The expressions of the experienced elders in the village changed, and they began to discuss. The silk of peace fell to the ground. This is the sign of a haunted house. The original intention of hanging the peace silk was to ensure safety, but now the peace silk couldn't be hung at all. It was obviously an ominous sign. At this time, I finally confirmed that it wasn't that the death scripture was wrong, but that Wang Zikin was just a dabbler in feng shui. The position of the stove door was definitely wrong. In the death scripture, there was a sentence at the beginning. A quack doctor's mistake only affects one person. A quack teacher's mistake overturns an entire family. Wang Zikin, a dabbler in feng shui, can actually make such a big name. It is really harmful. Although I was angry, Wang Zikin was still an elder, so I carefully said to my dad, "Dad, this isn't an ominous sign. It's just because the position of the stove door wasn't right." Third child, don't talk nonsense. Although my dad's expression wasn't good, he still interrupted me and turned to look at Wang Zikin. "What is a child like you know? Our Wang family has been doing feng shui for several generations, and we've never made a mistake." After this happened, Wang Zikin's expression wasn't good, and his tone wasn't right. I still wanted to say something, but my mom pulled me back and apologized to Wang Zikin. "Children don't understand. Big brother Wang, don't take it to heart. Let's first see what's wrong with the peace silk." Since my mom stopped me, I didn't say anything else, and thought that Wang Zikin would find the problem and fix it. After all, he was in this line of work. If I really pointed out his mistakes, it would ruin his reputation, and we would become enemies in the future. Wang Zikin snorted and turned to look at the peace silk. The originally noisy courtyard also quieted down, and everyone waited for Wang Zikin to explain. After muttering to himself for a while, Wang Zikin stroked the goatee on his chin and said, "The peace silk fell to the ground because of the wind. The wind represents the Sun position. The main gate represents the Kuan position. The Sun palace represents the Fu Liwing. This is the result of a woman's lack of virtue, causing a disaster to the house." It said that feng shui creates people, but in reality, people also affect feng shui. Therefore, this isn't a natural disaster, but a man-made disaster. After he said that, everyone's eyes stared at my mom. I stood on the side, completely dumbfounded. What did he mean by a woman's lack of virtue, causing a disaster to the house? It meant that my mom didn't follow the virtue of a woman, causing a disaster to the house's feng shui, causing the peace silk to not hang. What did not follow the virtue of a woman mean? It didn't need to be said that everyone understood. After thinking it through, the anger in my heart burned. Because of the anger, I couldn't even speak. My mom, who stood on the side, had a deathly pale face, and her entire body trembled. Rural people's tradition was to value reputation the most, especially for women. In the city, unmarried women would be surrounded by many suitors, and people would say that they were attractive. However, in the village, there would be elders who wouldn't like it. They would think that they were attracting bees and butterflies. If unmarried women were like that, married women would have the thought of suicide if they were gossiped about. But now, Wang Zikin had said that my mom didn't follow the virtue of a woman. Who was Wang Zikin? For dozens of years, whether it was a house in the sun or a house in the dead, the feng shui of our town had always been checked by the Wang family. In the eyes of the simple villagers, the words of the Wang family were the golden rules, and they couldn't be wrong. Why? Because he was a feng shui master. His words weren't just empty words. He had seen it through feng shui. Humans could lie to others, but would the heavens lie to them? In the simple values of the villagers, God wouldn't lie, and feng shui wouldn't lie either. Today was the housewarming ceremony, and all of our relatives and friends were there. If Wang Zikin's words were spread out, my mom wouldn't be able to live. She was the most traditional and simple woman in the village. This was the most shameful crime that the villagers didn't even dare to think about. But now, someone had pinned it on her. How could she live? I felt my entire body heat up and blood rush to my head. I directly rushed in front of Wang Zikin and said, "Don't slander me. It's clear that you opened the kitchen door in the wrong position. You opened the sun gate in the Qian position, and you messed up feng shui. You still have a nerve to say something like Sun Kuan Palace and Fu Li Wan. You don't understand feng shui, but you still came out to harm people." Wang Zikin was also enraged. He glared at me and said, "Just now, you said that opening the kitchen door in the wrong position, and I didn't want to argue with you. But you still don't know what's good for you. You can ask, when did the feng shui of the Wang family make a mistake?" Whether they made a mistake or not, the Wang family naturally knows. Feng shui is very mysterious, and no one dares to say that they are absolutely correct. Your Wang family sure is confident. I also waited for Wang Zikin. I didn't want to give him any face. Wang Zikin appeared to be even angrier than me. His eyes looked as if they were about to spit fire. He angrily laughed and said, Good, good, good. My Wang clan's several generations have become arrogant in your mouth. From your tone, you seem to have a lot of knowledge in feng shui, right? Good. Today I will discuss the principles of feng shui with you. If you can't give me a good reason, then you will have to kneel down and apologize in front of so many people. As a member of the Wang family who had been begged by the county magistrate, Wang Zikin had never suffered this kind of humiliation. Even if he said something inauspicious when he looked at feng shui, no one dared to offend him like this. I was about to say something, but my mom pulled me and whispered, "Third baby, don't." Seeing my mom being slandered and still worried for me, I almost cried. I held back a smile and said to my mom, "Mom, don't worry. If the Wang family's gramps came, I definitely wouldn't dare to say anything. But this half-baked feng shui master, I'm definitely better than him." "Huh, very good. Since you're stronger than me, then you can go and hang this piece silk on the wall. If you can hang it, then I'll smash my signboard today." I didn't even look at him. I picked up a shovel and a bucket in the corner and went to the courtyard to dig a bucket of soil. I poured the soil on the newly opened kitchen door and then came back to pick up the piece silk. I turned to Wang Zikin and said, "Of course I can hang it." After saying that, I didn't pay attention to him anymore. I directly climbed up the ladder and hung the piece silk on the nail on the door. This time, under everyone's gaze, the piece silk hung there steadily. Not even the foot of the cloth moved. The surrounding people started to discuss in bewilderment. All of them looked at me with disbelief in their eyes. The people in the courtyard were all my relatives and neighbors. Of course, They wouldn't believe that my mom didn't have any morals. However, no one dared to doubt Wang Zikin, and no one had any confidence in me. But now, the hard truth was right in front of them. They looked at Wang Zikin with strange eyes. Wang Zikin's face was also full of surprise, but it quickly turned into anger. He almost roared, "You use soil to block feng shui? That's a trick." He had already lost his mind due to his anger. I smiled at him disdainfully and said, "How can soil block feng shui? Soil belongs to Kuan, and I just used soil to temporarily block the sun position of the kitchen door. Didn't you say that not hanging the pea silk has nothing to do with the kitchen door? Just like you said, I blocked the feng shui of the kitchen door, but why did the pea silk hang there now?" Wang Zikin shut his mouth. After a long silence, he said word by word, "Water has no fixed momentum, and the wind has no fixed shape. Feng shui also changes according to the weather. Just now was the ominous hour, and now is the auspicious hour. That's why the pea silk is different." Even at this time, he was still stubborn. To be honest, I didn't want to destroy his rice bowl because his feng shui was wrong. It was because his character wasn't right. It was fine if his feng shui was wrong, but he didn't want to admit his mistake and put the blame on someone else. What was the difference between him and a beast? Of course, I wouldn't let him quibble like that. I directly said, "According to what you said, your feng shui was right. That proves that you opened the kitchen door at an auspicious position, right?" Wang Zikin nodded and still stubbornly said, "The kitchen door that the kitchen god used is naturally an auspicious position." Okay. I turned around and took out a pot of my mom's daffodils. I went over and placed it at the kitchen door. Then I said to the surrounding people, "Everyone, watch carefully. Put the flower in the auspicious position he mentioned. Let's see what happens." Everyone held their breaths and focused on the pot of ordinary daffodils. Chapter 24. Seeing this scene, even people who didn't understand geomancy knew that the position of the kitchen door wasn't the auspicious position that Wang Zikin had mentioned. They lifted their heads to look at him. Their eyes had changed from awe to suspicion and anger. The Wang family was the most famous geomancy family in this town. The people in the surrounding villages always went to the Wang family for funerals, weddings, and even new homes. The villagers didn't have a high income, but no one would save money for this kind of thing. Take my family as an example. When we moved the house, we had paid Wang Zikin 1,000 renminbi. My school fees were just 200 renminbi a semester. What do they want to spend so much money for? Not many people wanted to get rich. Most of the villagers just wanted to report their safety. But now, they found out that they had spent a lot of money to find a half-baked geomancy master. What happened to my house today has been seen through, but what about other times? No one knows if the feng shui that the Wang family gave me in the past has any problems. Wang Zikin's face changed. He pointed at me, his face red. Eventually, he said, "It's not because I pointed at the wrong position. It's because the geomancy of your house isn't good. Unless you can point out the auspicious position of the kitchen door and let this flower bloom again, it proves that your house has a problem with geomancy." At this moment, Wang Zikin had shed all pretense of cordiality. He wasn't arguing with me about geomancy. He was just pestering me endlessly. The leaves of the daffodil were curled, and the petals had fallen off. Even if it was placed in the auspicious position, it wouldn't have much effect in a short time. Moreover, there was a saying in geomancy, "It's easy to identify the ominous position, but difficult to find the auspicious position." In other words, it was easy to identify the ominous position, but difficult to find the auspicious position. After all, there were many ominous positions and not many auspicious ones. If one wasn't knowledgeable, it would be hard to find the auspicious position among the complicated positions. An old man in the village spoke for me. "Mr. Wang, no matter what, the kitchen door you pointed out is an ominous position. You can't deny it, can you? It's not easy for a child to recognize the ominous position. You want to find the auspicious position and make this dying flower bloom again. I'm afraid it's unreasonable. If children can find auspicious positions, why would they need feng shui masters?" The old man was knowledgeable. He said these words to criticize Wang Zikin's sophistry. On the other hand, he wanted to give Wang Zikin a way out. He didn't want today's matter to be too unpleasant. Who would have thought that Wang Zikin wouldn't appreciate it? Seeing me standing there in silence, he thought that I wouldn't be able to find an auspicious position. He sneered and said, "Didn't he say that his knowledge of geomancy is better than mine? Humph, it's clearly his family's feng shui that has a problem. There's no auspicious position in the kitchen at all. I just didn't say it out of consideration for his family's reputation. Now I'm being bitten by a dog." I didn't know what to say. I didn't expect him to be this shameless. He had already said that my mother didn't follow the virtues of a married woman, and he still said that he cared about our family's reputation. He was shameless. I couldn't help but stand up and say, "You're an old man, but I didn't expect you to be so shameless. All right, I'll find an auspicious location and let you see if it's a problem with feng shui or a problem with a good-for-nothing feng shui master like you." Then I picked up the potted flower and walked to the other side of the kitchen. Facing Wang Zikin's provocation, I didn't have a good solution. However, perhaps it was God's will, but Wang Zikin had arranged the Tianyi auspicious house layout for my family's 4 residences, and the location of the kitchen was in the Qian position. The kitchen was in the Qian position, and according to the death scripture, the auspicious position was in the Kuan position. This layout was called Heaven and Earth. The owner's mouth was flourishing, and the 6 animals were flourishing. Moreover, in the EU and Cho year-round, there would be auspicious events. There was a saying, "The golden star of Wutiu is named prolonged life," and the Qian and Kuan are in the right position. Both parents are happy to celebrate, and their children are named virtuous and virtuous. For heroes seize the osmanthus, and 10 years of fireflies shine in the Wenxian. Auspicious air fills the door, and people celebrate, and riches and honor spread throughout the world. The heaven and earth layout was the best layout for the kitchen's feng shui. Moreover, it was the year of rapid growth. However, even with this auspicious position, it was impossible to make the daffodil bloom again in a short time, as Wang Zikin had said. Everything in the world operated according to the principles of heaven and earth. Moreover, the more auspicious a layout was, the more difficult it was to violate the laws of nature. The key problem was that the Tianyi auspicious house layout that Wang Zikin had arranged for my family's 4 residences wasn't very good, and there was a danger that our descendants would be cut off. However, it was a true rapid growth layout. There is a saying in the book, "Great growth in the early years, and no descendants after a long time." The heaven and earth layout was a rapid growth year, and the Tianyi auspicious house layout was a true rapid growth layout. It was possible to achieve what Wang Zikin had said. After doing that, the heaven and earth layout would be damaged a little. After all, heaven and earth had a spirit, and going against the laws of nature would bring disaster. However, it didn't matter. Feng Shui needed people's fate to support it. If my house had the heaven and earth layout, it was hard to say whether it would be a blessing or a curse. On the contrary, it would be damaged a little, and the feng shui layout would weaken. In the long run, it would be the best choice. After we reached the Kuan position in the kitchen, I asked someone to block the door of the Sun position. Then, I reopened the door of the Kuan position and invited the kitchen god my father had prepared. After the kitchen god was invited, the door of the kitchen was completely fixed. Then, I placed the daffodil on the Kuan position. Many people had seen the scene of flowers withering. For example, in the middle of a summer day, some flowers that couldn't withstand the heat would wither quickly under the scorching sun. However, they had never heard of withered daffodil flowers. After I had done all of this, people in the courtyard gazed at me with curious faces. Only Wang Zikin wore a disdainful face. It seemed he thought that I was deliberately mystifying things. In just a short 20 minutes, the wilted and curled leaves of the daffodil gradually unfolded under everyone's gaze. It was full of vitality again. The wilted petals that fell to the ground naturally could not bloom again, but the small flower buds that were originally there bloomed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Ah, it's really blooming. How could it be? After the flower buds bloomed completely, people excitedly discussed. They couldn't believe what they had just seen. Wang Zikin's eyes opened wider than everyone else's. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. However, he didn't say anything in the end. After a long time, he swung his sleeves, turned around, and left. After I had proven myself, no one doubted my words anymore. My auntie's cousins were indignant. They wanted to grab Wang Zikin to settle the score, but I stopped them. Although I scolded Wang Zikin for being a dabbler in feng shui, besides the wrong position of the kitchen door, the other feng shui layouts weren't wrong. From this, I could see that he had some real skills. After learning so much about feng shui, I now understood how much damage a feng shui master could bring to a place. I was going to the university soon. If I offended Wang Zikin too much and he did something bad, it would be a disaster for my family. Moreover, many people in the courtyard had witnessed it with their own eyes. Feng shui was different from other professions. If he made a mistake, his reputation would be ruined. I was afraid that no one would ask him for help with feng shui in the future. After Wang Zikin left, the courtyard became lively again. My relatives and neighbors surrounded me and praised me. I'm worthy of being a university student. I know a lot about feng shui. On the other hand, my father was puzzled. Who did you learn feng shui from? How did you know so much? Of course, I couldn't tell him the real reason. I just smiled and said, I read a lot of feng shui books, and I learned it from the books. If Wang Zikin was here, he would have snorted at my words. However, my father was from the countryside and didn't have much education. He admired scholars the most. Although he couldn't say things like books have a house of gold, he believed that reading books could help one gain skills. After listening to my words, he didn't doubt me at all. Of course, I didn't lie. In the past 2 years, in order to study the death scripture, I had bought a lot of feng shui books to read. After comparing the 2 books, my learning progress was very fast. With the crackling of firecrackers, my family's housewarming banquet officially began. The banquet lasted for a whole day before it ended happily, with everyone cheering. Although there were some accidents in the process, it was a happy ending. My parents were also very happy, and their moods weren't disturbed by those accidents. In this joyous atmosphere, I didn't expect that the first time I showed my feng shui knowledge, it would cause a disaster in the future. Let's not talk about the future for now. 3 days after the housewarming ceremony, I was going to leave for university. Originally, my father was going to send me off to the county's train station. After breakfast, when I was about to leave, I unexpectedly saw my uncle driving a small car to our house. My uncle was a civil servant, the deputy director of the county's forestry bureau. He was the only powerful relative in my family. However, because of my aunt, he didn't have much contact with my family. My uncle was a bit of a henpecked man, and my aunt was someone who despised the poor and loved the rich. Moreover, my parents were also strong-willed, so our relationship became distant. Previously, during the housewarming ceremony, I had informed my uncle, but he didn't come. Today, however, he took the initiative to visit me and said that he would drive me to the county. Although our relationship was distant, we were still relatives. When my parents heard that I would be sent to school, they were naturally happy and didn't refuse. After I arrived in my uncle's car, he didn't drive in the direction of the train station. Instead, he went to the center of the county. I felt strange, and after asking, my uncle said that he needed my help with something and wanted to take me to see someone. My dad was a bit angry and said, "My child's ticket is this afternoon. How can he help now? What if he delays his registration at university?" Who knew that my uncle didn't care and waved his hand. "It won't be delayed. Isn't Sam's registration the day after tomorrow? I've already booked a plane ticket for the morning after tomorrow, so he won't be late. If Sanwa can help with this matter today, his university tuition will be settled." I was shocked. He actually booked a plane ticket for me. You have to know that in that era, not to mention the people from the countryside, even the people from the city rarely took a plane. Speaking of flying, in my dad's eyes, it was probably the treatment of the country's leaders. Chapter 25. Uncle drove the car all the way to the Golden Coast Hotel in the center of the county. This was the best four-star hotel in our county. Standing at the door, you could feel the luxurious atmosphere of gold and jade. My dad had never been to a place like this before. After getting off the car, he didn't know where to stand and looked at my uncle anxiously. I saw that my dad was really uncomfortable, so I told him to wait in the car and I would go with Uncle. With Uncle here, my dad naturally didn't have anything to worry about. He let out a sigh of relief and returned to the car. I followed Uncle and entered the hotel. I had never seen the splendor of a four-star hotel before. However, young people have their own vigor, so they weren't too afraid. Following Uncle, we took the elevator and arrived at the luxurious suite on the top floor. After knocking on the door, a young woman wearing a black uniform came to open the door. Uncle, who usually didn't smile, said with a smile, "Miss Sue, is Chief Lou here? I have an appointment with Chief Lou today." Uncle's polite and even flattering tone made me feel a bit strange. He was a civil servant. Although he wasn't a high-ranking official, he was still the deputy director of the Forestry Bureau. Was there a need to be so polite to this Chief Lou? This young woman was obviously a secretary type of role and was quite polite to my uncle. She nodded and said with a smile, "Chief Lou is already waiting. Please come in." After entering the door, I saw Chief Lou in a suit and leather shoes in the suite of the hotel. He looked to be in his 40s or 50s and looked like he took good care of himself. His face was very warm, but he gave off a very dignified feeling. From his appearance, this Chief Lou's forehead was plump and smooth, and there was a slightly bulging longitudinal bone that connected to the nasal bone and ran through the glabella. In the middle of his forehead was the Guanlu Palace. People with this kind of appearance would have a prosperous career and would either be rich or noble. It was obvious that this Chief Lou wasn't a normal businessman, and the assets he had were definitely not small. However, what made me feel strange was that the two sides of Chief Lou's Guanlu Palace were a bit strange. When I looked at Chief Lou looked at me suspiciously, then asked Uncle, "Director Ho, this is Mr. Zhou I mentioned yesterday. He set up a feng shui layout that can make withered grass grow flowers." Uncle enthusiastically introduced me to Boss Lou and added, "He's also my nephew." Chief Lou clearly had doubts about my age, but he didn't ask any further. After listening to my uncle's introduction, he turned around and extended his hand towards me, then said with a smile, "Sorry for disturbing. Mr. Zhou, I really had something to do today, so I wanted to ask Mr. Zhou to come and take a look." People in the business world, even if they had any problems, they would never show it on their faces. Director Lou's warm attitude made me feel like I was bathing in the spring wind. After shaking hands with him nervously, Chief Lou arranged for me and my uncle to sit down. He also specifically asked the beautiful female secretary to bring us some tea. It was the first time I sat with an adult and used adult etiquette to interact with people, so I felt a bit awkward. However, Chief Lou was very good at adjusting the atmosphere. After sitting down, he didn't hurry to say what he wanted me to do and just casually talked about some small things in life and talked about his friendship with my uncle. Slowly, I also relaxed. Through their conversation, I roughly understood that Chief Lou wasn't a person from our county, but a big entrepreneur in the city. He had a good relationship with our county magistrate and had a lot of investment projects in our county. After understanding the situation, I also understood that my uncle probably wanted a curry favor with the county magistrate, so he brought me over to help this Chief Lou. After exchanging greetings for a while, we finally got down to business. However, Chief Lou didn't directly tell me what problem he encountered, but asked me first, "Mr. Zhou, did you notice any problems after you came?" As for how to address me, I already told him to call me Xiao Zhou, but Chief Lou said that if he wanted to invite someone, he had to call me Mr. It was a rule that couldn't be changed, so I could only let him call me that. However, I still felt a bit awkward when a 40 or 50-year-old person called me that. After listening to his question, I knew that he was testing me on purpose, since my age didn't make him feel at ease. I didn't mind, and just muttered to myself for a while, then told him that I wanted to take a look in the room. Chief Lou smiled and extended his hand to me, and said, "Little mister, please go ahead." I got up and walked around the room twice. I didn't look at the layout of the room. the lintel of the door, or the main hall, or any other key places in the geomancy of the house. Since this wasn't Chief Lu's house, it was just a temporary place. There was no point in looking at the geomancy of the house. After walking around the room twice, I finally confirmed my thoughts when I saw a safe under the storage cabinet in the room. When I entered just now, I saw that Chief Lu's forehead was plump and wide, and his face was extremely good. However, the two sides of his forehead were a bit uneven, and the color was dark. The two sides of his forehead, in terms of fortune, are the palaces of his parents, which represent the health of his parents and ancestors. So, from the looks of it, either Chief Lu's parents and elders weren't in good health, or his ancestral home and ancestral grave were recently attacked by evil spirits, causing his ancestors to be uneasy. After saying that, I pointed at the safe I saw just now and asked Chief Lu, there should be something passed down from your ancestors in this safe, right? After I said that, Chief Lu's expression already changed slightly. After I asked this question, Chief Lu's mouth was completely wide open, and he nodded in agreement. Only then did I say with a smile, I can feel a wave of ancestral chi lingering around your safe, but this ancestral chi is very weak. From the looks of your face, what Chief Lu encountered should be something that happened to his ancestral home and ancestral grave. After hearing that, Chief Lu clapped his hands for me a few times and said full of praise, "What a young talent." It said that one shouldn't be judged by age, and I've finally seen it today. Mr. Zhou, you're right. Something did happen to my family's ancestral grave. After hearing my words, my uncle and the secretary curiously turned to look at the safe, as if they wanted to see the ancestral chi I was talking about. However, this thing isn't something that normal people can see. I made a guess from Chief Lu's face, then carefully observed it, and used the seeking ancestral chi sensing technique recorded in death scripture to sense it. After receiving praise from others, I naturally had to be polite and humble, but Chief Lu immediately said, "Mr. Zhou, no need to be humble. I've looked for many misters before, but Mr. Zhou is the first to be able to tell the reason in one sentence. Mr. Zhou is young, yet you have such knowledge. You must have a master to guide you, right? I wonder who Mr. Zhou's master is. Can you introduce me to him?" I didn't think that after praising me, Chief Lu would ask about my master. My uncle also interrupted and asked me, "Yeah, third child, I didn't know you learned feng shui a few years ago. Who knew that you become so amazing in just a few years?" Naturally, I wouldn't fool them like I told my dad that I was self-taught, so I directly pushed the matter to the fatty's father, saying that he learned it from our village's coroner since he was young. Coroner? Chief Lu clearly didn't really believe it, but the fatty's father had already passed away, so he didn't pursue the matter further and only sighed. There's a wise man in the countryside. What a pity. After talking about this, Chief Lu turned around and apologized to my uncle, saying that it was related to his family's ancestral grave, so it wasn't good to tell outsiders. Then he brought me into the inner room of the suite. After we entered, Chief Lu told me about his family's ancestral grave. Chief Lu was born in a rich family. On the family tree, it could even be traced back 20 to 30 generations. However, when it came to his generation, due to some historical reasons, his family declined. However, perhaps because of the protection of his ancestors, Mr. Lu had been doing business since he was young, and it had been very smooth. Soon, he established a huge family business. However, in the past few years, for some reason, he kept meeting with setbacks in the business world. At first, he didn't care about it, but after a few times, he started to suspect it. After asking someone to take a look, he found out that there was a problem with the ancestral grave, saying that the layout of the grave wasn't good. Chief Lu had always believed in feng shui, so after knowing the situation, he immediately spent a lot of money to find an expert to find a new place with good feng shui, ready to move his family's ancestral grave there. Everything went smoothly from start to finish, but there was a problem when they were moving the grave. At that time, he arranged for a few workers to dig up the grave, but before the workers could dig up the soil, they had already injured their feet. It wasn't a big deal if it was just one or two of them, but the problem was that more than 10 workers who moved the grave that day all injured themselves. It was very strange. However, this wasn't a big deal. At that time, when he realized that the situation wasn't right, Chief Lee asked them to stop. Before he could think of any ideas, that night, his 4-year-old daughter fell from the second floor of their house, breaking one of her legs. At that time, he found countless feng shui masters, but they couldn't find anything. After a period of time, Chief Lu felt that the previous time might have been a coincidence, so he moved the grave again. In the end, this time, before he could ask the workers to do anything, everyone who went to the grave suddenly vomited and had diarrhea, unable to work at all. On the same day, his eldest son, who was in middle school, was playing basketball and was hit in the head by a collapsed basketball stand. He had a moderate concussion and was unconscious for many days. At that time, a group of classmates were playing basketball, but only his son was hit. After that, Chief Lu didn't dare to talk about moving the grave anymore. However, he encountered a series of disasters in the business field, causing him to be unable to eat or sleep in peace. It was because of the family assets that he had accumulated over the years that he was able to support himself. Otherwise, he would have gone bankrupt a long time ago. This time, he asked me to come here to see if there was any way to solve the problem of moving the ancestral grave. The situation, he told me, was beyond my expectations. After seeing the problem, I thought that his ancestral grave had encountered some kind of calamity, and I just needed to solve it. I didn't expect the problem to be so complicated. As I didn't know the details, I didn't dare to say that I could solve it. However, Chief Lu was very open-minded, and he didn't force me to promise anything. He just said that in the afternoon, he would arrange for someone to take me to the ancestral grave to check it out. Then, he arranged a room for me and my father on the top floor of the hotel. It was the same level as his own room, the most luxurious suite. After arranging for my father, he took me to the ancestral grave of his family in the afternoon. Chief Lu's ancestral grave was in Lin County, but it wasn't too far away. It only took 2 hours to get there by car. When we arrived, I looked around and took a deep breath. The feng shui of his family's ancestral grave didn't need a feng shui master. Even an ordinary person could see that it was dangerous. The graveyard was surrounded by a barren land. Sand, stones, and debris were everywhere, but there wasn't a single strand of wild grass. Not only that, but the several mountains in the vicinity were also bare stone mountains. The only difference was that the mountain in front of the grave was a long and narrow stone mountain, while the mountain behind the grave was a continuous series of short and thick stone mountains. According to the death scripture, in the chapter titled Dragon Cave Sand and Water, the mountain in front of the grave was called Piercing Sky Rainbow, while the continuous series of mountains behind the grave were called Withered Bone Dragon. There was a saying about the feng shui of this type of grave: Piercing Sky Rainbow, Withered Bone Dragon, 9 layers of difficult bloodline inheritance. Chapter 26. After checking the tomb's layout, I turned to look at Chief Lu in bewilderment. I couldn't figure it out. Tomb feng shui is different from Yang Mansion feng shui. Yang Mansion feng shui uses the layout and orientation of man-made buildings to change the aura, thus affecting the fate of people. As for grave feng shui, it was to find an auspicious place between the mountains and rivers that gathered the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. It could determine one's fate. There was a saying, 1 life, 2 luck, 3 geomancy. In reality, this was based on the 3 souls of humans, or the 3 souls. They were heavenly souls, earth souls, and human souls. Heaven soul was life, earth soul was luck, and human soul was feng shui. The feng shui of a yang residence could affect the earth soul and change one's luck, while the feng shui of a grave could determine the fate soul. From the feng shui of Boss Lu's ancestral grave, to put it bluntly, Boss Lu should not have been born in this world. The grave of extinction meant that there would be no more descendants. However, Mr. Lu was still alive and well, and she had heard from him that he had a son and a daughter. In the past, I might have doubted what the death scripture said, but after my family moved to a new home, I had no doubts about the contents of the death scripture. Where did the problem come from? While I was frowning and thinking, Director Liu said emotionally, "Mr. Zhou, look at the surrounding landscape." Even before I asked Mr. to take a look, I felt that something was wrong here. In the past, I heard from a teacher that a grave with bad feng shui wouldn't be able to rest in peace after death. They would be tortured endlessly in the netherworld. These years, every time I think about the suffering of my ancestors, I feel terrible. As a son, I can't let my ancestors live in peace. This is unfilial of me. Boss Liu's words were sad, and I was also touched. What he said was the truth. The feng shui of a tomb was not only related to future generations, but also related to the peace of the person buried after death. It was said that when a person died, the lamp would be extinguished. But in reality, after a person died, it was only the soul that returned to the heavens. The soul of the earth would dissipate, and the human soul would remain on the corpse. Of course, there were also some earth souls that did not dissipate by chance, and they would become ghosts. The so-called ghosts were, in fact, the Yin souls that were born from the fusion of the earth's soul and the human soul after death. If the feng shui of the corpse burial ground was not right, the human souls would definitely suffer. Legend has it that there were 18 levels of hell in the netherworld. Those who did not cultivate virtue when they were alive would suffer endless torment in the endless hell after death. This was referring to the suffering of human souls after death. Generally speaking, the feng shui of Chairman Liu's ancestral grave belonged to the leaf fire fiend, and it was an extremely severe type of leaf fire fiend. The entire grave was equivalent to a furnace, and the bones of his ancestors were roasted in this furnace. One could imagine the pain and suffering, not to mention that Director Liu promised me a lot of benefits. Even without those benefits, I wouldn't stand idly by when I saw this kind of tomb out of pity. I nodded at Chief Liu and promised him that I would try my best to find a reason why they couldn't move the grave. I spent the whole afternoon looking around the graveyard. Besides confirming that the geomancy of this tomb was extremely bad, I didn't find anything else. Chief Liu didn't say anything. He smiled and comforted me. "Just try your best. It's okay." I was a little embarrassed. I had defeated Wang Zikin in the geomancy competition, so I thought that I had reached a higher level in geomancy. I didn't expect that I would encounter a setback this quickly. When we returned to the town that night, I asked Chief Liu to find someone to buy cinnabar, bat dung, and bright moon grass. I planned to go to the graveyard the next day to personally sense the resentment in the ancestral grave. I wanted to see if I could find any clues. The next day, when we arrived at the graveyard, I mixed cinnabar and bat dung. Then, I scattered them around Chief Liu's ancestral grave. Cinnabar had a strong yang energy, which could break the yin energy. Bat dung, on the other hand, was called luminous night sand in Chinese medicine. It could be used to treat eye diseases. In feng shui, bat dung had the effect of locking the yin energy. It was similar to Chinese medicine. Eye diseases were caused by the stagnation of yang energy in the eyes. For example, when a person burned with internal heat, they would have eye wax. Bat dung had the effect of locking the yin energy. It could ensure that the yin and yang energy in the eyes were in harmony, which could help to treat eye diseases. The mixture of cinnabar and bat dung had a strong effect on locking the yin energy. Today, I wanted to personally sense the resentment in the ancestral grave. To prevent any accidents from happening to Chief Liu's family, I had to use the yin locking formation to lock the yin energy in the entire ancestral grave. After setting up the cinnabar and bat dung, I removed the leaves of the bright moon grass, leaving only the rhizome. Then, I followed the instructions in the death scripture and tied 3 small knots on each rhizome. Then, I placed them around the ancestral grave according to the 8 trigrams. After setting up the yin locking formation, the yin energy in the graveyard was isolated from the outside world. The cool feeling of the graveyard disappeared. Chief Liu's beautiful secretary stood next to me. She was surprised and asked, "Why is the weather so hot all of a sudden?" It was summer, and after the Yin energy was isolated, the temperature was around 30 degrees Celsius. It would be strange if it wasn't hot. After arranging everything, I asked Chief Lu and the others to stay outside. I grabbed a hoe and walked into the formation. The difference in temperature was obvious. The temperature inside the formation was 10 degrees Celsius lower than the outside world. I could even feel the cold air surging around me. To avoid any mistakes, I purposely went to the place where Chief Lu had told me about the previous time. I read the clear and bright spell under my breath. Then, I picked up the hoe and started to dig. After digging twice, I felt the Yin energy around me thicken and the temperature drop. I even had goosebumps. I didn't move and continued to dig. However, before I could pick up the hoe, I caught a glimpse of an old man in front of me. His skinny body was curled up. He was sitting next to a tombstone not far from me. His eyes were cold and gloomy as he gazed at me. At that moment, I recalled the feeling I had when I saw the flesh-eating baby for the first time. It was as if my body had fallen into a cold cellar and my mind wasn't clear anymore. I guess the reason why the previous gravediggers had done this to themselves was because they had seen the scene in front of them. After losing their minds, they couldn't control their bodies anymore. I bit the tip of my tongue and hissed, "Clear your eyes. Listen, calm your mind." It was the simplest fiendish breaking spell. However, people had yang energy to protect their bodies. When they lost their minds, the simplest fiendish breaking spell could work wonders. After chanting the spell, my eyes brightened. The shriveled old man disappeared from my sight. The cold and gloomy surroundings seemed to have softened a little. It wasn't as cold as before, which was bone-chilling. After walking out of the Yin ceiling formation, Chief Lu came to greet me. "Did you find anything?" I nodded. The ghost that looked like an old man was Chief Lu's ancestor. When a ghost suffered, it was the same as when a human suffered. It could be seen from the outside. Sometimes the ghost's skin was torn, and sometimes the limbs were disabled. However, the ghost of Chief Lu's ancestor didn't have any of these symptoms. It meant that Chief Lu's ancestor didn't suffer when he was buried. It was completely different from the geomancy of this tomb. Originally, this was another doubt, but from this doubt, I suddenly thought of another possibility. Chief Lu's ancestor was from a rich family. He had both money and power. Why would such a family choose a grave with such bad geomancy? Even if the grave didn't understand geomancy, or the geomancer they found wasn't reliable, which led to the poor geomancy of the ancestral grave, why didn't Chief Lu's ancestor find someone to solve the problem? Then, I thought about the fact that the airless grave didn't lead to the end of Chief Lu's family's descendants. The answer was obvious. Chief Lu's ancestor must have found an expert to solve the geomancy of this graveyard. After thinking it through, I asked Chief Lu to calm down. Then, I moved along the west, north, and northwest directions of the graveyard. I made a mark about 10 meters, 3 feet, and 3 inches from the center of the graveyard. Then, I asked Chief Lu to arrange people to dig at the place I had marked. Since the place was far away from the graveyard, it wasn't a taboo to dig here. I didn't set up another Yin ceiling formation. After digging around 2 or 3 feet, we heard the loud noise of iron and stone hitting each other. Then, someone screamed, "We found something!" Chief Lu was excited. He shouted, "Hurry up and dig." I was startled and hurried to stop him. "Stop digging and dig from the side. We just need to show half of the thing inside. Don't move it." Although Chief Lu didn't understand, he wasn't surprised by my words. He asked his men to do as I said. After the items were revealed, I saw that in the west, there was a snow-white quartz sculpture of a white tiger. In the north, there was an obsidian sculpture of a black tortoise. In the northwest, there was a golden stone column. After seeing these 3 items, I exhaled in relief. At the same time, it also proved my theory. If this graveyard had offended the Li fire fiend, we had to start with the Kinwater position in the west. Since metal generates water, the North DUI gold position and the Northwest Qian gold position were also the positions to dissolve the fire. These 3 stone carvings formed a formation called the Metal Water Formation. It had a miraculous effect in dissolving the Li fire fiend. After discovering this formation, I finally had an explanation for the strange things that had happened to Chief Lu's ancestral grave. Moreover, when he had touched the ancestral grave, the disaster he had suffered wasn't because of the grave's resentment. It was a warning from the grave. Once he touched the grave and broke the metal water formation, he would have to bear the curse that would cut off his descendants. I explained everything to Chief Lu. After I finished, I was surprised to see that Chief Lu didn't look happy. Instead, he looked a little gloomy. After pondering for a while, he asked, "Mr. Zhou, if we want to move the grave, how should we do it?" I was surprised. I didn't understand him. The feng shui of the graveyard is protected by the metal water formation. It won't cause too much of a disaster. As for the bad business situation, we just need to reinforce the metal water formation to resolve it. We don't need to move the grave. Moreover, the ancestors' remains have spirits. If we move the grave, I'm afraid it won't be a good thing. Chief Lu waved his hand. "Mr. Zhou, I think you misunderstood me. I don't want to ensure the safety of the grave. I just want the grave to have better feng shui. That's why we must move the grave. Mr. Zhou, if you have any requests, please tell us. As long as we can move the grave, everything is negotiable." His attitude made me even more confused. Moving the grave was a big deal. After so many years, I was afraid that many of the ancestors' remains in the grave had been mixed with the soil. If the grave was moved and the remains were lost, no matter how good the feng shui was, it wouldn't be able to make up for it. Chapter 27. I tried to persuade him for a long time, but he wasn't moved at all. From his words, it seemed that as long as he could move the grave, he didn't care if his children got hurt. Since he had said that, I didn't have anything else to say. However, I couldn't understand why he had such an attitude. He didn't care about his family's safety just because he wanted to make money. I had heard the saying, businessmen value profits more than parting. Now, I had finally met someone like that. Everyone had their own ambitions, and it was hard to say who was right or wrong. However, I didn't have the ability to help him move the grave. No matter how much money he gave me, it was useless. After I told him the truth, he looked very disappointed. He didn't want to give up. "Can you think of a solution later?" I sighed and told him, "To move the grave, I need a special talisman. I don't have the ability to draw it yet." As soon as he heard that there was a way, he cheered up. "How long will it take for me to draw that talisman?" I thought for a while and gave him an answer. 3 years. CEO Lu narrowed his eyes as if he was calculating something in his mind. After a while, he nodded and said, "All right, in 3 years, if there's still time, I'll look for you again." "There's still time? What's there to do?" His words seemed to imply something, but he didn't wait for me to ask. He waved his hand and walked down the mountain. Although he didn't do what he had promised, when we returned to the hotel, he sent me 10,000 renminbi. He also told me that he had booked a room for me until the next day. At the same time, he had arranged a car for me to the airport. It was the first time I had ever studied geomancy for someone. At that time, I felt flattered, and I even felt a little guilty towards him. Later on, when I understood the great effects of geomancy, I felt much more at ease. I didn't feel as guilty as I was now. Thanks to the ticket that Chief Lu had given me, I was able to take a plane for the first time in my life. Moreover, it was a first-class cabin. However, it wasn't a pleasant feeling. After I left the ground, I had an inexplicable feeling. It wasn't strong, but I felt uncomfortable. Later on, when I learned more geomancy, I learned that geomancy masters had an ability related to the earth. When I left the ground, I lost this ability. That was why I felt uneasy. This was a story for the future, so let's not talk about it for now. On the plane, there was a young man sitting next to me. He was handsome and well-dressed. As soon as he sat down on the plane, he stuck to the flight attendants and flirted with them. He looked like a slut. I was quite envious of such a young, rich, and handsome man, so I couldn't help but pay more attention to him. The man seemed to notice that I was looking at him. He turned his head and glanced at me. Who knew that after he glanced at me, his eyes were fixed on me? He stared at me for a long time. He didn't even care about the shyly talking to the stewardess next to him. Being stared at by a grown man like that I felt a little scared. I didn't dare to look in his direction anymore. I turned to look at the scenery outside the cabin. In the end, the man directly walked to my side and stuffed a business card into my hand. He smiled and said, "Brother, I see that your glabella is dark. I'm afraid that something bad has happened recently. Also, your nose is a little red. I'm afraid that your love life isn't going well. This is my business card. Take it. If you have any problems in the future, just call me. I guarantee that I'll solve it for you." When I heard that, I was dumbfounded. This guy is a fortune teller? He read my fortune? But a dark glabella, bad luck, a red nose, bad feelings. What kind of twisted logic is this? I've heard of fortune tellers swindling money before. I guess I've met one today. No wonder this guy looked like a hoodlum. It turns out that he's a hoodlum who swindles money. I didn't think that swindling money was a good job these days. I could even sit in first class on a plane. However, this guy's eyesight wasn't good. Although I was also in first class, I was poor. If he wanted to swindle me, he made a mistake. I smiled at him and said, "Okay, I'll contact you if I have any problems later." It was obvious that I was trying to brush him off, but he didn't care. He only chuckled and said, "Then, we'll meet again in the future." After saying that, he turned around and returned to his seat. He continued to play with the beautiful air stewardess. I took a look at the business card in my hand. There was no beginning or end to it. There wasn't even a job title written on it. There was only a name and a phone number. However, the name was a little strange. It was called Nangong. I've heard of the surname Nangong before, but I didn't think that this guy would directly use this name. From the looks of it, it was probably a fake name. I didn't pay much attention to it. I put the business card in my pocket and threw this matter to the back of my mind. After entering university, the exciting university life was completely different from middle school. When school started, a lot of student clubs became active. I didn't want to sign up at first, but I accidentally found a club called Ishui Research Club. I didn't think that there would be such a club in school. With the attitude of making friends and learning Ishui, I signed up to join the Ishui Research Club. After joining, I followed the members of the club and held a few meetings. Only then did I realize that the so-called Ishui Research Club was just a hobby class. A group of people would take books like the Book of Changes and casually flip through them. Then, they would talk nonsense, and it was considered a meeting. This was still good. There were even some people who took horror novels and told each other stories. After a few meetings, I lost interest in this Ishui Research Club and didn't have any hope. I might as well study the death scripture instead of hanging out with them. During this period of time, my feng shui knowledge had reached a bottleneck. Previously, I had only studied knowledge, but now I gradually began to try to make talismans and comprehend the qi that feng shui masters talked about. This qi had the same sound as qi, and it also meant qi. However, it wasn't the qi that we breathed. The profoundness behind it was hard to describe with words. Only by comprehending qi could one be considered to be a feng shui master. Only then would one be able to make talismans and learn the true methods of a feng shui master. This was also the reason why I told Chief Lu that I could make talismans in around 3 years. Thus, I was very busy during this period of time and didn't have much time to waste. Unfortunately, the vice president of the Ishui Research Club happened to be my senior from the previous year, and his dorm was right across from mine. Since I had talked about some of the more profound content of feng shui in the previous meeting, this senior immediately treated me as a close friend. Whenever there was an activity in the Ishui Research Club, he would definitely come and do everything possible to pull me in. It was purely a waste of time, but it wasn't easy to refuse. Every time I went to an activity, it made me miserable. Just as I was thinking about leaving the Ishui Research Club, this senior called Dai Nanzhou suddenly came to find me mysteriously. He lowered his voice and told me, as if he had discovered a shocking secret. "Did you know that something big happened in our school?" This fellow was usually very surprised, so I didn't mind and casually asked him, "What happened?" "Something happened in our female dorm." This guy purposely said the words girls' dormitory loudly. After saying that, he looked at me with a proud expression. I didn't say anything, but a group of people in the dorm surrounded me and chattered about what happened. All of their eyes were wide open like animals in heat, and they were filled with a desire for knowledge. Dai Nanzhou cleared his throat and said unhurriedly, "In our female dormitory, at midnight last night, there was a sudden scream. At that time, half of the people in the building were startled awake. Many people didn't know what happened, so they turned their heads and went back to sleep. However, the few people in our third-year female dormitory couldn't sleep. This fellow acted like a storyteller, and some of his hot-tempered roommates couldn't take it anymore and hurriedly told him to stop bullshitting. Only then did Dai Nanzhou chuckle and tell them what happened in the female dorm last night. It turned out that the scream last night came from the female dorm's toilet, and a lot of people surrounded it. They found a third-year female student in the toilet. Her name was Suzy Yu. When a group of people rushed over, the girl called Suzy Yu was hugging her knees, sitting on the floor of the toilet, and shivering. Everyone went over to ask, and Suzy Yu said that after she fell asleep last night, a little girl suddenly came over and woke her up, telling her that there was a lot of blood on her bed. Suzy Yu lifted her blanket and looked, and she didn't know when there was a basin under the blanket. It was half full of blood. She was so scared that she quickly got off the bed. Then, the little girl asked her to take the basin and pour the blood into the toilet, and she followed the little girl to the toilet in a daze. When she got to the toilet, she poured half of the blood into the basin, then went to the water pipe to wash the basin, but when she turned the faucet, all that flowed out was blood. She turned around in shock to look at the little girl, but the little girl suddenly jumped into the sink, hugged the faucet, and drank the blood that flowed out. Only then did Suzy Yu scream in shock, waking up half of the people in the dorm. The group of people was frightened by Suzy Yu's story, and when they went back to ask her roommates, they all scoffed, saying that they hadn't slept yet. So how could there be a little girl? It was just that Suzy Yu slept for a while, then suddenly got up and went to the bathroom with the basin. At that time, they thought she was going to wash up, so they didn't ask at all. Only then did everyone relax, saying that Suzy Yu just had a nightmare, and then sleepwalked out, advising her not to be afraid. Suzy Yu was the only one who swore that it was true. After a while, Suzy Yu felt a little better after being comforted by everyone, and she went back to the dorm to sleep. But just as she climbed onto the bed and was about to crawl under the covers, she suddenly screamed again. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.